Oh, there we go. Microphone is on. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll get started with the, thank you, Robert, with the meeting. Calling the meeting to order. First order of business is, Sharon, would you please do a roll call?
Yes. Heidi Campbell?
Present.
Mike Cash?
Present.
Robert Neal?
Present.
Jennifer Hackett?
Present.
Don Majors?
Present.
Jeff McCormick?
Present.
Kenneth McMichael? Vanessa Pass?
Present.
Beth Reardon? John Sherman?
Present.
Don Turner? We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Thank you very much, Sharon. I'd like to welcome everybody to a meeting that we've been anticipating for quite a while. I want to go through what the agenda is going to be today. We have a couple of pieces of business that I hopefully will not take too long. One of those being, of course, the approval of minutes from the previous board meeting, as well as our annual responsibility of having a presentation then either for our annual report that Sharon and Clay will present to us. We then will, after that presentation, we'll have a ability for us to have a Q&A from the board, and then for the public, we're going to have two different public comment periods. One will be just on the annual report. And we will, I will limit that conversation primarily because I think, for the most part, unless the board disagrees with me, that's going to be a less important and less kind of focus of today's meeting. While it's a responsibility we have, so I don't take it lightly, it's the bigger piece will be when we have the report out on the draft, which our team is ready to do. And from there, we'll, after that, and we're going to break that presentation into two sections. It's going to be long, so we'll do part of the presentation, then we'll take a brief break, and we'll come back and finish it. And after we finish the whole thing, and then we'll open it up for public comment from the public. I don't know if we have any other business. If we do, we'll do that, and then we'll finish it up and close out the meeting. We're here, I think we're scheduled until 8. Is that correct, yes. Sharon? So I think I told everybody previous meeting who was here to buckle up that we'll be here a while. Sharon was able to get some food. She didn't bring cots, but you did bring food, right?
But that could be arranged.
Right. Oh, okay. All right, with that, we need approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
So moved.
I'll second the motion.
Motion seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. Thank you for that. Next order of business is the annual report. Sharon, are you going to do a summary on that for us? Now, real quickly, I don't recall, has all the board members been through an annual report before? All right, so basically, Sharon will give us, and I don't know if Clay will be speaking as well, but Public Works gives us a summary of the report that we have to submit, and Public Works does it on our behalf to the state. This is an annual requirement, and you'll see that, if you haven't seen it, you will see the details of it. And there's a lot of problems with the way that the state asks it, and so just bear with us and bear with Sharon as she presents it. But this is one of our duties that we have. So.
Absolutely. And unlike previous years, we're going to do this as succinctly as possible because the real excitement of this meeting is around the master plan. So I'm going to run through this very quickly. I know you all received a copy of the report by email, and there is a final copy on your desk. We also posted it online 2 weeks ago tomorrow, so almost 2 weeks prior to this, and I know some of our folks were notified that it was there, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to look it over. So I'm going to hit the very high highlights. One of those is what we started to do this last year with education. We were able to reach several thousand members of the community. Is it coming up on your screen? Okay, good deal. On education, we have enhanced our programs instead of focusing on recycling to focus on reduce, reuse, and recycle to make it more an activity of hitting the hierarchy instead of focusing on those. Recycling is the last step, not the first. We also have started a neighborhood ambassador program where we are getting volunteers in the community to help promote recycling, help us reduce contamination by talking to their neighbors, handing out stickers showing what goes in recycling carts. And that's been, we actually have an intern who's going from undergrad to graduate school who's going to be working with us as part of her graduate project over the next year on that program. TDEC was amazing this year. We really want to give a big shout out to them for their support. We received an organics management grant, started 2 drop-off sites for food waste, and are focusing on a lot of school education and community workshops on backyard composting. In addition to that, we got a donation of recycling bins from Coca-Cola that are being distributed to Metro Public Schools. And finally, we received an education and outreach grant to help us further communicate about contamination and what are the appropriate things to go in the recycling cart. So it has been a banner year for us on education, slightly unrelated, but I'm very excited about it. The Tennessee Department of Transportation just notified us they're giving us a $200,000 grant for litter prevention. I hate litter. And we're very excited. I know it doesn't necessarily relate to us particularly, but it's a very exciting thing for us to have that opportunity. Non-matching grant. Just saying, TDEC, you can, non-matching. We're very excited. Moving on. This slide shows our landfill waste from the last year. Our municipal solid waste actually went down about 20,000 tons, but construction and demolition went up about 50,000. So overall, we're still up, but I was at least pleased to see a decrease in what we're sending to Class 1 landfills. Oh, this is, well, I guess it's not cut off. This shows the tonnage on recycling that was collected. This is the residential recycling, which is Metro and the satellite cities. Before you all start throwing stones on the decrease, please notice that the decrease is wood waste. When we don't have major storms, our wood waste numbers always pull the big total down. But if you look at mixed recyclables, which is our curbside program, I mean, it's not a huge increase, but there are a number of these items that actually went up, some that went down a little bit. But once again, if we don't have a big storm, we don't have a lot of problems in that area, our wood waste numbers are always lower. On the commercial side, and I will say this was very dramatic, it was sometime, I think, around 1:45 this afternoon, we got some final numbers, so we were kind of, it was a kind of last minute, but you can see that these went up a fair amount over the last year, including cardboard, which I was very excited about. So we are seeing an increase in the commercial side for the past year. This gives you that snapshot of what happens to our waste as it passes through from us and businesses, going through the waste transfer stations and directly to the landfills, and also on the construction and demolition side, going from Southern Services, which gets most of it. And you'll notice 40,000 tons are other. That is actually, TDEC has done a really good job of getting construction and demolition landfills to start reporting the county of origin. So we got data from counties, from other C&D landfills that we didn't realize were taking Davidson County waste. So we're getting actually much better data on the C&D side, similar to what we have been getting on the MSW side in the past. This shows the sad story of how much is actually controlled by Metro, which is 16% of the waste, and the large majority of it is controlled by the private sector. And then my least favorite slide, which shows our historical trends since 2007 for our landfill, and this is combined landfill, so it includes C&D and municipal solid waste going up, our population going up, and our recycling stagnant, well, dropping and kind of basically leveling off. And that is the highlights of our report for this year. I'll take any questions.
increase in commercial cardboard that you're excited about, is that, do you interpret that as being an increase in recycling juxtaposed to just a byproduct of an increase in waste in general?
I think it's a combination of the two, but I do think that Waste Management and Republic are working very hard to sell a recycling dumpster at businesses. And I do think that there's more and more businesses that are adding cardboard. But full disclosure, Waste Management bought out another recycler. So we did get data from a company that we hadn't received data from in the past. Combined Resources, which is very, very close to where their commingled recycling facility is, sold out late this year. So we have, I think, 3 months of data from that facility that we didn't have in the past. They didn't have that much cardboard, though. They primarily were office paper. But we are getting better data, yes.
Is there any movement toward the enforcement of the bans?
Yeah, I would love for there to be movement in that respect, and it's something that is going to be a recommendation in the plan, because we really would need to have some inspectors that could go out and help. We don't have any inspectors that can do that now, so it's all an honor system, which doesn't work well. I mean, you do have people that are going to do it just because they know they're supposed to, but the vast majority of people won't. And until we can have some inspectors that would be able to spot check at the transfer stations and help enforce it, it's never going to be, really very well done. Any support for inspectors would be greatly appreciated. Yes, sir.
On transfer stations, is there still thought about Metro taking over a transfer station itself that might give them more control of the waste stream?
That is something that we're looking at as part of the planning process because, right now we have no revenue-generating facilities. So a transfer station, an anaerobic digester, even a recycling processing facility that would allow Metro to have a piece of the pie is a very important part of what we're looking at as part of the, are we going to be talking about that at all today, or is that a little bit? Okay. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes, your grant money from TDEC, do you have any idea how it's going to be used?
Yes. So the organics management grant, it's going to be used to purchase backyard compost containers that we will give to people that go through a short workshop. So they have to want to be interested in composting. And so it will be funding the workshops, funding school programs, and then purchasing, and I apologize, I can't remember, but it's a fair number of backyard compost bins that people will get as part of the workshops. And the education and outreach, the vast majority of that is going towards our Recycling Ambassador program, which is a volunteer program, so the money is going to largely be spent on purchasing, making new decals for our recycling carts. The old decals that we had on there in 2002 didn't show plastic. And there are a lot of carts out there that don't have information on them about recycling. So our Recycling Ambassador program will be proactively going out into communities, putting them on carts, giving to people, going to community meetings, and we'll be using our beautification commissioners as well. People love them. They're big. They go on the front of the cart. You can't miss them. And they're in English and Spanish so that we can help the folks in our international communities to understand what goes in the cart and what's involved in recycling.
Sharon, I noticed a big drop-off in glass recycling. Is there any reason why that you know of?
I think
Because we
that
both
was,
noticed it in commercial.
pardon
And
me?
then I was also, that leads me to ask the question about the honky-tonk glass recycling program, if that is showing results as well.
So glass, on the commercial side, we were not able to get, and Clay, correct me if I'm wrong, Strategic Materials didn't give us any numbers.
They gave us numbers, but they lost contracts.
Yeah. So Strategic Materials, which is a, they don't recycle bottles. They recycle like plate glass and stuff like that. I don't know if they're slowly phasing out here in Nashville. Tiffany, do you know anything about what's going on with them?
I think that they're trying to get out of the glass business here. And in the past, I think last year, it was given over 2,000 for Metro and 18,000 for
Yeah.
Strategic. So that makes total sense that you don't have to year?
It is going to drop, yeah. The honky-tonk program, which is going to be is not represented in any of these numbers because that
Okay.
started in January.
Oh, yeah, obviously.
I don't have numbers as of today, but 6 weeks in, from 12 honky-tonks, we picked up 85 tons. We had a big jump in tonnage when we started collecting from Honky Tonk Central. Evidently, that's where it all is.
Other questions? All right. Well, we'd like to open up also for public comment. As I said before, we're going to have a public comment on this annual report, and then we're also, of course, going to have one that I assume will be a little more in depth. It's really up to all of you out there around the draft plan that will be presented. Is there anybody who wants any comments on the annual report? John, Bruce. So I think just to make sure we have time to get to the good nitty-gritty, I'm going to suggest that we have a 5-minute limit on comments on this part, and of course we'll have an extended one on the draft. So. You going to time me?
Thank you very much, Chairman Sherman, members of the board. My name is Bruce Wood. I'm the elected president of BURNT, a longtime environmental recycling group here in Nashville. I'd just like to suggest that the fundamental measure of a recycling program is how much we landfill. And one of the slides she showed demonstrated that we're landfilling a lot and that we're landfilling more than we were in 2007. And in 2007, there was a 10-year report that projected we would divert 60% of the waste in 10 years. And this is the 10th year. And so we're landfilling a lot more than we used to, and we did not meet that 60% goal. And one thing that John Vanderhorst has pointed out to me, we were talking about numbers, and he said that Kirby diverts 15,000 tons of solid waste, and that's basically 1% of the waste stream. We have 1.5 million, 1.6 million waste stream, and 1% of that is diverted by Kirby, and yet that's the all-star program. That's the program that people hold out as being integral to what we're doing. I'd like to say on page 9, there's a short paragraph that talks about the jobs that are generated by recycling, and one in particular is a reconditioned beds and mattresses. Well, you see, that's the whole point of recycling, is to keep the waste out of the waste stream, but also to generate jobs. So if we're generating jobs, if we have people working, that should be in the report, because that is the fundamental purpose of recycling, is to create raw materials that then create businesses and jobs. And you haven't created it unless you put it down on paper in black and white, and it's just not there. I remember one time, this whole program has been kind of a gypsy program, and we've moved around from place to place. And we used to meet at the Metro Council chambers. And at one meeting there, somebody asked Sharon Smith, how would you rate our program? And she thought, then she said average. And I thought that was way too low, way too high, but way too low to what it should be. With our population, our informed people, the money we have, we should be doing way better than average. And I think based on the presentation we just had, that we aren't doing better than average. We're doing average. I mean, the criteria for a solid waste program is how much you landfill. It was just like a staircase going up from 2007 to the present. More landfill, more landfill, more landfill.
Hey, Bruce, you got about 2 minutes.
Thank you. And that's not the direction we want to go in. And then also the 2007 report predicted if you follow these, our recommendations, you'll divert 60% of the waste stream. Well, we're not diverting 60% of the waste stream. I think that in this report, and you should just say that you want it and vote on it, is that there should be a box that says the Regional Solid Waste Board notes that we are out of compliance with the 2007 10-year plan. You don't ask to reopen the plan. You don't say you're going to spend any money, but just make that note that we are not complying with the 2007 solid waste plan and 10-year plan, and because we're not. They said 60% diversion, and you saw the numbers that we're not diverting that much. And then, gee, I don't know. This will be my last point. I might not have understood correctly, but I thought that Sharon, and that's twice I've said her name, and I really don't like to say names, is held up a slide that said that we diverted or recycled 20 more tons of commercial waste from 199,000 to 220. Well, give me a break. Again, that's out of a 1.5 million ton waste stream, and suddenly doing 20 extra tons in commercial is exciting. Well, we all have different things that excite us,
Bruce?
and that's not for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Mr. Vanderhurst?
I got a little different explanation on the wood waste from Clay before the meeting, as he gave me the NES approximation. I'm going to have to get that later from him at the office. He said that NES only did about 7,000 this year or something. So that would mean Metro did 30,000. They did about 37,000 last year. So that's not as big a drop. So that's, we might have had less storms, but that wouldn't be the biggest reason for the drop. I'm glad Sharon includes, or whoever includes these things that she concentrated on, and mostly at the end of the report, that's not actually required by the state. That's the most practical stuff in here. I did not hand everybody kind of the 2016 numbers that I've been able to do, so because I think I've given it to people in between these meetings one way or another. So if anybody doesn't have to have the 2016 numbers, I guess catch me afterwards. And I got a few sheets to get on that. That's and one difference on the public, of course, you don't have the NES numbers in this wood waste that we have here, because that's we consider that essentially functionally private, and private just. We don't even consider that part of the waste stream, because that's always has and always will be handled just as it is by businesses. Has no landfill reduction functions. They do it for economic reasons, and it's just never been a problem. It's never going to be a problem, so it's just why even waste the time dealing with that? So yeah, the numbers just keep getting worse, basically, and on the sheet too, just notice one cute thing here, how just amazingly flat the recycling has been in the last several years. I mean, it is just, it's so little change that it's less than the little pen line difference. It's like we're getting very, very, very used to the way we're doing recycling, and it's just staying the same. And that's just. So every year, Public Works gets up there and they say, we're doing this, we're doing that. And the bottom line is there's no change, and I think that's something to note. You do mention the consultation in this annual report, so I feel justified in saying something on that needs to be said before the presentation. And that is, I hope that you guys keep in mind the charge of zero waste to the consultants, and I hope you ask along the way about anything they say. You know, if it comes down to amounts that's taken out of the waste stream, ask about it. To try to pen down so that you don't get something said to you and suggested that it's going to be a big thing, but in fact it's a really small thing. Let me give you an example of things that have been mentioned in the past by Metro Public Works
Hey, John, you have about 2 minutes.
Okay. So these barge symbols that I use, these little ellipses, represent 3,000 tons a year. Just for example, Metro Public Works has mentioned, for example, turnip grain reuse center in the past in a way that makes it sound really great. Well, they do a good job of what they do, but you'd think from the explanation that it takes something significant out of the waste stream. Just to give you an idea, that business takes up a storefront, does a great job of what they do. What they take out of the waste stream, assuming all is taken out of the waste stream, is 1/100th of one of these little barge symbols annually. That's it. And that gets time of yours taken up being talked about as if it's something, not to fear, private sector is kicking in and doing great things. Another thing, I don't think they mentioned this, Compost Nashville is another well-run company, does a great job of what they do, but Compost Nashville annually takes about 1/30th of one of these little barge symbols out of the waste stream each year. Again, not much. My point in saying that is that the amounts matter, and if we're going to get to zero waste, i.e. get rid of this huge landfilling thing here, we got to think big. The landfill companies size their businesses to handle more than our entire waste stream. Why aren't we thinking that way in terms of what we do for material recovery?
Great. John, thank you. That's 5 minutes. And I assume you'll be back up for a little bit more or a lot more when we talk about the draft.
Depends if the consultants have figured out a way to get to zero waste and it's all solved, I'll get up here and say, great, and that'll be all I'll have to say.
There you go. All right.
We'll see that if that happens.
I don't think it's a big incinerator. Any other comments from the public on the annual report? Okay. With that, we'll close the public comment period on this. Board, do you have any other questions, any other responses from what you heard from the public? Well, I think I just want to say one thing. I think we all know this, is that it's been pointed out that, we didn't hit 60%. It's been pointed out that it's been flat. And I think that's one of the reasons why we actually asked for a new plant, right? And hopefully that this one, the intention is this one, which we didn't have last time, was have some teeth in it that we can have, and some actual, both the mayor and the council's support for it, and ultimately the dollars behind it as well, which we haven't had to date, and this is the opportunity. So with that, I'll ask for a motion to move on the annual report, either yes or no. A motion in support of the annual report to accept it, or a motion to not accept it? I
move to accept.
Robert moves to accept. A second? Second by Mr. Kenneth. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Well, very good. So we've gotten through the beginning of the agenda. We're now going to turn to and have a presentation from our consultants about the draft plan. Who's up first?
That would be me, Chairman Sherman.
Okay, sir. So and you're going to tell us when we're going to break, but board know that I just had a conversation with the consultants yesterday about kind of the length of this, and we, as I said before, Kenneth, you weren't here, and Dina, you weren't here yet, I don't think, but it's going to be broken up. We're going to take a break halfway through. I don't know how long the whole thing is, but, if there's a burning question from a board member on a point, please speak up. At the same time, and if it gets too out of hand and we're moving too slowly, I'll ask to hold questions to the end. But, if there's something that you just need to know before we move on, please do. So with that.
Thank you, Chairman Sherman. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate again the opportunity for our team to come before you to give you an update on the solid waste master plan for the metro region. Today, I have quite a few of the team members here with me today, so I want to introduce you to them. We have Lisa Skumatz from Skumatz Economic Research Associates, of course, Chris Gable from CDM Smith, Bob Geddard from RRS, and Tiffany and Maria from Wilmot, which you folks are very familiar with, and there's Zach, hiding over there, Zach Daniels with CDM Smith. So we brought all of the expertise today to hopefully be able to answer any of the questions you do have, and if we don't have an answer, we most certainly will get back to you with an answer. As Chairman Sherman indicated, we've got a lot of information to go through, so I guess buckle in and get ready for a ride. We're going to talk a little bit first about the online survey results that we've seen. Lisa will speak a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about waste characterization, recycling, and that's just really to sort of reset the stage. You guys have, you've heard that information, so we're not going to go into great depth of detail there. But where we really want to dive in is on the programs that we're looking at to get to two different stages. We're looking at it in terms of high performance, which is getting to approximately 75% diversion, and then going the extra step to zero waste, which is, as we've talked about before, 90+% diversion. So we're going to be looking at them in two different steps, two different programs. Then after we go through that, we'll take a break. I think it's about 30 minutes for a break, or if the board has a couple additional questions they want to ask at that time. Then we'll follow up with talking about the diversion modeling to get a little bit into what diversions we're looking at or anticipating from the different programs we're talking about. And then we'll get a little bit into program cost. And then at the end, we're going to follow up with a discussion on funding, which, as you mentioned, Chairman Sherman, is key, but also the authorities that are needed to implement policies and a structure around that. So that's kind of what an overall view of what we're going to be going through today. I think if you have questions along the way, please feel free to jump in. We're here to answer any questions you have and provide you with hopefully information that answers John's questions about are we getting to zero waste in a fast enough, aggressive timeline. So hopefully I'm sure you still have some questions, John, but hopefully we have answers for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about the online, or I guess you're going to start with acronyms. There are going to be a lot of acronyms, so we wanted to give you a little bit of some definitions before.
Give you a fighting chance. Okay. Well, thanks for inviting us. It's very exciting to be able to tell you about where we are in all of our work. And for acronyms, in order to make slides that weren't tremendously long, single-family, multifamily, residential, those are pretty straightforward, and commercial. Then EOW shows up periodically. That's every other week or fortnightly. So that might talk about trash, or it might talk about recycling collection frequency. SAYT, save as you throw, and we'll define that, but that talks about paying more for more trash, paying less for less trash, providing an incentive. High performance and zero waste are two of the sort of sets of programs that we're moving forward, so you might see abbreviations for those. Either C&D or CDL for construction and demolition, or construction, demolition, land clearing. You can see it both ways in the literature. Food waste or food scraps, whichever way you prefer to refer to it. Cardboard is referred to, I think, once in the slides. Yard waste is another thing, YW. And PRR is a metric that's called percent recoverables remaining, and it's based on the waste composition work that you'll hear about in a moment. Okay, so we try to keep them to a minimum, but those are what they stand for. Okay. We had one of the early tasks was a survey task. And in that, we wanted information from both the residential and commercial sector. We wanted information on some of the services providers, satisfaction, usage, costs, and things like what materials still remained in the waste stream, what did they still have to deal with even after what they were doing already. And most importantly, we cared about their feedback on some of the changes, programs, policies, et cetera, that we expected to consider based on some of our earliest work here in the community. We had a statistical survey first, and we did that before we widely advertised what we were doing because we wanted that feedback to be uninfluenced by some of rhetoric or stakeholders or others that sometimes get involved early on because they have skin in the game. And so we wanted to know what was the real feedback before that kind of influence. The second was the open survey. So once the statistical results were returned, then the city opened it up to email lists and newsletters and whatnot so that we would get many responses. We got responses from single-family, multifamily, and businesses. I wanted to give a little bit about statistics because I talked about a statistical survey and I also talked about an open survey, that open one that whoever heard about it, whoever wanted to, whoever was interested could reply. The graphs, we'll start at the bottom of the slide. So at the bottom of the slide, it talks a little bit about statistics. If you are in a community that's a size of 10,000 and you want to know how many responses it takes you to get a really strong confidence level, like plus or minus 5% at 95% confidence, that chart would tell you that you need about 370 responses. If you don't care about being quite that accurate, if you're willing to go plus or minus 10%, you would only need 95 responses. Okay? You can also look at those same kinds of figures at a 90% confidence level. But what I wanted to make really clear was, if you're a much larger city, you do not need a lot more responses. The one lesson I hope you take away is statistics is not proportional. It is not at all proportional. So if your town is 10,000 or your town is 10 million, you need about the same number of responses. It's kind of like you start with, gee, if we get about 30 responses, we're starting to talk the law of large numbers. But once you hit a certain number, you really don't need a lot more responses in order to be more confident that your answer is close to the truth or what you would find if you got true information from everybody. So it's really important to recognize that more is not necessarily better. More is more, and more is more expensive, but more isn't necessarily more accurate. Okay?
Can I ask one question? Is this predicated on a push or a pull survey? I mean,
it's assuming that they are random responses to a survey sent out to a random set of respondents.
And so your methodology for actually acquiring that random set of respondents was, how did you get your N?
In this particular survey, for the residential and commercial survey, we used purchased samples, and they were sent a request to respond to a web survey.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So, and you can see also where we're talking, so the graph on the lower right talks about how the getting lower is good because that means you're going from high percent, variance sort of spread to a low. So you're wanting to go down on the curve, but the going to the right says how many more responses you're getting. So what this is telling you is once you hit a certain point, it takes a lot more responses to move the needle at all on that percentage sort of confidence. So that's what I wanted to explain. Given that, we can go back to the top and say, well, gosh, we got 183 responses from the single-family respondents in the statistical survey, and we got 88 from multifamily and 89 from commercial. That tells us our confidence in our results is, our band for our results is about plus or minus 10% at the 90% confidence for multifamily and commercial. We're doing much better than that for the single family, but we expected to. We wanted to hit a lot of single family. That was one of our focus areas. And combine single family and multifamily into the residential, you're ending up with 270 responses, which is plus or minus 5% at 90% confidence. So that's a good comfort level. That's sort of a level that you're hoping to reach. And overall, we're at that 380 mark for residential and commercial. So we've got good responses and good accuracy and confidence in the statistical results. And you'll see that we got quite a few. We got 2,700 responses to the open survey so far. We haven't closed it, and we got a lot of responses. How do we apply that? How good do we feel about the statistical results or what did we find from the statistical results? We found strong support for adding glass, strong support for adding weekly food waste and yard waste collection, strong support for every other week recycling, and every other week is what the EOW is. Strong support for establishing and supporting a solid waste goal, a percentage goal. We found that everybody thinks businesses should recycle more, or it's a very strong support there as well. And there was strong support for having no separate fee, having recycling costs be embedded in the trash bill, and that's from the residential and the commercial sector. We also find that there is strong support for possibly doing a hauler contract if that turns out to be the most efficient option. For Save As You Throw, there's support, and for requiring yard waste and organics, there's also support. So we see good, strong support across the board for these kinds of strategies that we early on thought might be interesting to get feedback on. Next up, we have Chris Gable.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to provide a little refresher on the characterization report that we did. The study was a 2-season study, as you may recall, and we had presented a few other compositional arrangements for various sectors and different ways to look at it. For today's session, I think it's important just to note some of the combined differences. These are for the 2 seasons combined, residential versus commercial. So the 2 things that really stand out is, one, that residential overall, percentage-wise, has a lot more organics. And that commercial is pretty high in C&D, but yet has similar plastics and paper. One thing you would want to keep note on regarding this is that if you delve into the food industries within commercial, that pie chart looks very different, obviously. And so overall, you still need to keep in mind that quantity-wise, organics are still a very big part of the commercial sector. So if you're looking to separate and divert organics, the commercial component's also very important. So these were the top 10 components that we looked at in terms of what's being landfilled. I think the takeaway is, if you look at the left side, there are a number of categories here that would fall under organics. The food scraps, the compostable paper. There's a category, as you move down, other organics and yard waste. All of those add up to about a third. So it's reinforcing what the breakdown is in that pie chart we showed you. On the other side, on the commercial, more than a third is C&D, food waste in particular, and cardboard. So those 3 are still targets, even though you'll see that paper is the large majority of what's being recycled. And if you look on the commercial side, that paper is predominantly cardboard, but there's still cardboard that's not being captured. And that's really the whole purpose of this waste characterization study, is to provide us a snapshot of what your waste stream and what your recovered waste is looking like in 2017. And this is our baseline that we can then start using and comparing to future characterization studies. As you watch these pie charts change, you'll notice contamination levels coming down and sectors that we're targeting coming down on the landfill side. And so these are the components that predominantly contaminate your recovering. This is what people are primarily inappropriately putting materials into their recyclables and not thinking about it. And those tend to be, on the residential side, quite a bit of glass. As we know, a lot of people want to recycle glass, so I think they think about that and do it. But it's not part of the program. So we'll take care of that. Compostable paper is another one. Compostable paper is not the same as paper. You can't recycle it as paper. C&D material, this little projects you're doing inadvertently get thrown in there too. On the same side, if you look at commercial, food scraps or food waste, dominates the contamination levels on that side. Not so much glass. That's down the way a little bit. But compostable paper is also up there as well. So I just wanted you to keep some of these in mind as we look at these, what we're calling featured strategies, as we look at the high performance and then the zero waste, getting you to 75% diversion, and then from 75 up to the zero waste levels. The pie charts that we're showing you here in the top 10, these are the items that we're really keeping in mind, hoping to see these contaminant levels come down, and in seeing a lot of those big pieces of pie that you see on the landfill pie chart getting thinner.
So can I just check and see? Are you saying that in the recycle bins at home, people are depositing clothing?
Yeah. Yes, they are. Textiles of various natures get thrown in there.
Okay.
It's not a huge amount though, 0.8%. But there are textiles that are found in the recycling. And anecdotally, we find that with talking to the MRF recovery facilities manager, he talked about a number of unusual items, that happen to make their way through. But glass is the one you really hear a lot about. Yeah. Okay, we ready to go on? Yeah. Next one? Okay, so we're going to move on now to the program strategy discussion, and Lisa's going to lead that, starting with high performance.
Thanks. So the way that we're going to talk about the strategies that we're moving forward are sort of in three sections. One is high performance, which are the strategies that are going to get us from where we are now to about 75% diversion. The next set will be those that move us from that 75% up to 90% to get to zero waste, and Bob Geddard will be talking about that. And to support all that, we need to have the facilities that underlie that, and we'll be back to Chris and folks on that. So we're moving to high performance, beyond to zero waste, and then building up the supporting infrastructure. Oh my, what a complicated graph. Let's build it up, okay? So we're going to build this up, and this is like a pie chart, but it's a donut chart instead because it's a little bit whiter and easier to see, more white area. We're starting with a current diversion rate of about 13% in the upper left-hand corner. Our goal to get to 75% means we're going to have to add around 62% more tonnage to get to that 75% first stage set. What we find is if we look at all of the all the programs are represented in these in that pie chart, but we find that 3 of the programs, the ones that are called out, the residential save as you throw, the commercial save as you throw, and the C&D deposit programs, get us a huge amount of the way there. We're counting on that for about 37 percentage points. Okay. If we add several more programs and get to 11 programs total, that gets us to 55% of our 62%. So those programs in general, those 11 programs, are very important are the core of getting us to our goal. And we'll talk about most of these programs as I talk about the individual strategies that we have in mind for getting to 75%. But you can see that we're hitting the vast majority of this pie chart through these 11 programs. It doesn't mean we only have 11 programs. We also have a few that have been difficult to measure or have tons that cut across programs. They lead to or they support other programs. So they're hard to separately identify tons associated with those, and we'll talk about those as well.
So just to be clear, the different colors on here?
Different colors on here are not meaningful in this particular chart. Okay. I wanted to mention the things on the lower left, where it says smaller ton strategies, because some of those I'm not going to talk about in more detail. I'm mainly going to list a few that I'm not going to be mentioning in most of the rest of the presentation, because they aren't responsible for a lot of tons, and we're going to focus on those that are particularly more tonnage delivering. One is requiring that landscapers must bring yard waste materials to a certified recycling facility. Another is public space recycling, and public space recycling is important because it's visible. It may not deliver a lot of tons, but it's visible, it's setting a new norm, it's getting people to expect that recycling is part of living here in this city. Another one that's important is the city job preference. What we mean there is any contracts that the city puts out for construction, demolition, or potentially for roads and other things. You get extra points, or you get preferences, or you only get qualified for that if you show how you're going to recycle, reuse, et cetera, as part of that contract work. I'm going to talk a little bit multifamily coming up, and I'll also talk about every other week trash coming up, so I'm going to skip those. The next one, S33, the bagged fee or bag ban. That's not, again, not so much for tons, but it does do a couple of other things, one of which is stop MRFs from gumming up as much and other things like that. So it's part of what people expect to see, and it has some function as well, and it's important for that part. Next one is putting compost, the use of local compost as part of the building requirements. So if any kind of compost is going to be added, any soil amendment must be local compost. You can't have a strong compost facility if you don't have a demand for the product. This is part of creating that demand for that product. Okay. And the save as you throw, more aggressive, I'll talk about in a moment, as well as every other week trash commercial. So those are the some of the less important, less tonnage strategies, but very important parts of setting the stage and providing other elements. Okay. So the first step I'm going to mention doesn't have tons associated with it, and I'm going to talk about what the needs are, because I don't want people to think that we can't implement, start hearing about these strategies and say we can't implement them. We are assuming that we'll have some essential authorities already set up as part of this, and Martin will be talking about how we get those set up later on. But the ones that we need in order for you to have an open mind about accepting that these strategies can actually be put in place are we need to have the authority, responsibilities, authorities, enabling services, enforcement, and funding elements that are important to setting the stage. We need to be able to enforce area-wide ordinances, services, mandates, regulatory authorities and policies across all sectors across the region. We need to be able to regulate service providers region-wide, recover funds for services, charge, issue RFPs, put together contracting arrangements, and also be able to work cooperatively in order that facilities can be developed that are effective, cost-effective, well-placed, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things. The way we get there, you need to understand that those authorities are assumed as part of this, as part of the strategies we're talking about. Martin's going to talk about how we get there. We also know it's very important in order to have tracking goals and metrics associated. We need to be able to track tons. We need to be able to measure progress and use that to prompt decision making. So if we don't know where we are, and we don't know that we've underperformed in some area, we don't know whether option A or option B should go in next. So that's really important as part of it. We're recommending traditional and somewhat untraditional measuring metrics, one including called percent recoverables remaining. That's what the PRR stands for. That option is based on the kind of waste composition work that you heard Chris talk about just a moment ago. And we need the authority, again, those authorities, in order to compel reporting by the various people that will have the tonnage information we need in order to track progress. So those are two underlying things that are very important to even being able to implement this next set of strategies. We're going to start with the first strategy being save as you throw, and it's a package. It's not only save as you throw, but it's some supporting things as well. Residential sector, we're talking about save as you throw, which is putting in a new charging system for trash. When a household puts out trash, they don't just put out as much as they want. They get charged based on whether they put out a small can, medium can, or big can. And they get charged more for a big can of trash than they do for a small can of trash, which provides an incentive for people to take stuff out of the trash and put it in recycling or in organics, or to source reduce in the first place. Give to Goodwill, buy things that are repairable as opposed to disposable, things like that. The other things that are supporting are an ordinance that this doesn't only happen for the city, but it happens for all the haulers operating in the area, and that we also have some supporting things like making sure we have supporting programs including organics and recycling provided on a routine basis, with the cost of those programs embedded in the cost of the trash, so that trash plus recycling or trash plus organics is not more expensive than trash alone. The trash is the bill. It is, as it turns out, the single most cost-effective and most effective strategy you can put in the residential sector, hands down. It's because it has those three effects. It encourages recycling, organics diversion, and composting, backyard composting, and so on, as well as source reduction. So it has that big impact, and mainly its cost is it's a new billing system. Yes, it has some carts, but really the main thing is it's just charging a different way. You're not sending new trash trucks down the street for that save as you throw element. It has three effects, and more than 10,000 communities around the U.S. and Canada have Save As You Throw, including a substantial share of the largest cities in the U.S. The best management, you can see in that tiny little map in the lower left that, in fact, there are states where it's clustered. It's certainly clustered in the Northeast and the Midwest and the West Coast, but it's also in place in the mountain states as well, and it's been growing, over time quite dramatically. The best management practices, I forgot that is an acronym, and I apologize for that. BMP, best management practices. Please add that to your acronym page. Anyway, one is that you can't just have, you can call it pay as you throw or save as you throw, presumably if you had 90 gallons, and if you add a fee for another 90 gallons, that could be save as you throw, but that's really in name only. What you need is something that also provides an incentive, and there are two ways to provide the incentive. One is you make sure there's a small cart available so that those people who want to recycle a lot get to pay a little amount and have an incentive to do that. The other is that the increment in price between a large cart and a medium cart and a small cart has to be substantial enough dollar-wise for it to affect people's behavior. There are some statistical results and others showing what that range has to be. That's far down the line for us to talk about, but it means you need to have a substantial difference in price and a small enough cart to provide a real incentive. We're not talking about 90 gallons and add $2 and you get another 90 gallons. That is more administrative headache than the program would be worth. You wouldn't encourage much recycling at all. And the other thing is, some barriers, like if you provide a trash container, you have to provide the other kinds of containers as well, so that it's not a barrier to recycling that, oh gosh, I have to go find a cart or organics or so on.
Can I ask a question about that? So currently, as I understand it, I live in a different city and we handle things, the trash ourselves, but in Metro Nashville, there is no charge for trash. And so this would require the implementation of an administrative system that would be pretty intense, right? Because you would have to be going to every household and informing them of this new change and the charges. But moreover, you'd be having to monthly bill these people and keep track of all that. And what entity would do that? What organization within Metro government would be responsible for that?
Can we defer that to Martin's top?
Well, I can address that very quickly. So there's a possibility, obviously this is all stuff that we're going to flesh out further, but there's a possibility that, for example, instead of the 96-gallon cart that you get now as part of your property tax, it goes to a 32-gallon. And that's covered in your property taxes. And larger carts then have fees. It could be billed on the water service bill. It could be, Public Works could create their own billing. I see it possibly as wanting to tag onto an existing bill somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of options.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay. There's strengths and weaknesses associated with the Save As You Throw program. The strengths are the equity. People who put out similar amounts pay the same. People who put out more are charged for the fact that they're putting out more, and so on. And there are also some concerns, and I'm happy to address anybody's concerns about those. It can, it's there. It's overall 10,000 communities plus and growing have found it to be that the positives definitely outweigh the negatives, and happy to talk about that. 3-bin is a real key component. We're talking about trash and organics, and we're talking about recycling on a regular basis. We're talking about every other week recycling in this case as well. We're talking about every other week recycling for a couple of reasons. One, it provides really great access and with a large bin, a 96-gallon bin. The other is that we find that going from every other week to weekly recycling does not add very much more recycling, but it costs almost twice as much. So the cost of those last tons is really, really high, and it's better to spend those dollars on making sure you have a frequent organics program, because that's the stuff that's retestable and so on and so forth. So it's looking at it sort of as an optimized system is the right way to look at it. You gain maybe 1 to 3 percentage points by having weekly or recycling versus every other week recycling. It costs you 40 to to 50% more money. Spend that on other services, and it's a better package and a more cost-effective and higher delivery package. Let's see. It's more effective than other options. Save As You Throw is more effective than some of the rebate programs or reward programs or other things. This clear, simple economic incentive really drives consumer behavior. We find that it reduces the amount that goes into the trash can by 17 percentage points. About a third of that is to increased recycling, about a third to increased organics diversion, and about a third to source reduction in the first place. So. There are many cities that are examples in the U.S. and Canada. It's mandated in several states, including Minnesota, Vermont, Oregon, and Washington. It's in place in Seattle and Austin and thousands of others, and about, I can't remember what percent of the largest communities, but I'm going to say something like 30% of the largest 100 cities or more. So. That's number one. Now we say, well, why don't we do the same thing in commercial? You might say, well, you do pay as you throw. We already know that the businesses pay by the size of bin, the number of bins that are collected, and the frequency of collection. Isn't that volume-based weight? Isn't that save as you throw? Well, yes, they are paying more for more trash, but they're not getting that same incentive that's critical, which is trash plus recycling is always, almost always, more expensive than trash alone for the commercial sector. The residential sector, they get the recycling as an embedded cost. You need to make that same switch over into the commercial sector in order to get that same kind of response. So instead of saying, well, you just pay for trash as it is, you need to pass an ordinance for all haulers operating in the area to say, when people subscribe to trash, they get trash service plus the same amount of recycling service in one combined bill. It's a trash bill. Then trash plus recycling is not more expensive than trash alone. And you put a limit on it because otherwise, what if you have businesses? How does a hauler figure out what their costs are going to be if there might be a business that has many times more recycling and so on? They feel a lot less nervous about providing. If you set a limit, that limit needs to be set based on what your goal is. If your goal is 50% recycling for the commercial sector, then you need to have equal sizes for trash and recycling. If it's higher than that, you actually need to have more recycling service embedded in there than the trash service. So it's set like that. Let's see. And you would set a recycling list. You would also say that small businesses or businesses that had screening problems could be provided that service in 96-gallon bins that could be slipped into the screening area, and so on and so forth.
Excuse me.
There are examples in other communities around the country, including Seattle and Aspen, Colorado, and others. Please.
No, go ahead. But I was just curious, what kind of marketing strategies, if I missed it, what kind of marketing strategies do you have in place to be able to get these incentives out to the public to understand what they need to do?
You mean marketing strategies for these programs?
For these programs.
For
these programs, so that the individuals can understand what they need to do.
Please do.
That's something that will be developed as we move forward. So right now, we're looking at possible strategies, but when it comes to implementation, there's going to be work done on how we would set up the program, how we would communicate, how we would work with the appropriate entities to get the word out. For example, the chamber, but also there will be sort of input from the businesses and individuals on this as it moves forward. So this is the sort of first part, is we're looking at what are our best options for massive waste reduction, and then the implementation part will come with some more guidelines and plans to, especially for something like this that's potentially very controversial.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. And this, so we'll have a price incentive finally in the commercial sector that will encourage recycling as opposed to discouraging recycling, which is the system that exists now. And as I mentioned, Aspen passed an ordinance that all commercial haulers had to do this, as well as other communities. And one of the things that's part of this package, in addition to both for this and as part of this Save As You Throw and as part of the residential Save As You Throw, we're also introducing a food waste ban at the same time, so that there's an additional reason to be driving that food waste into the organics cart as well. This is also on the commercial sector coupled with an ABC law. An ABC law, all beverage containers law, says that it's in place in North Carolina and a number of other communities around the country. It says that if you don't have a recycling program in place for your beverage containers at bars, restaurants, et cetera, places that have a liquor license, then you can risk the non-renewal of your liquor license. And it's got very high compliance, needless to say. We propose that we would introduce that as part of the enforcement and part of the situation as part of the overall based commercial strategy, as well as adapting that for a food waste situation as well. If you serve food and you don't have food recycling program that you can demonstrate, then you also risk losing a license. It uses existing enforcement mechanisms, and it's very, very strong. You have a number of, and those two programs deliver a lot of tonnage. We also, because you have some existing bans, we recommend strong enforcement of the existing ones that you already have. Your hard work is done passing the ban. We're talking about adding food waste ban as well, but we're not talking about quite enforcing it really quite as strongly quite yet. We want to make sure that there's a facility that can handle the food in place. We also want the appropriate education to go along with that. But right away, we would suggest enforcing the bans you already have and phasing in the enforcement of the residential and commercial food waste ban. We recommend enforcement via inspectors, and the onus be on the generators, not on the haulers, because the haulers really feel strongly, and I think arguably with reason, that their job is considered to be collecting the materials, making their customers, providing service, not enforcing some of the city policies. And so usually cities that there's a strong, they tend to use inspectors that go around and inspect the containers with an incremental system of a warning, a fine, and then ultimately partial payments are, your water bill and so on. So anyway, these kind of programs are in place in Seattle, North Carolina, and many others. Enforcing bans is a standard part of business. Another key set of policies is a set of small business policies, which have 11 small components of them, but you really need to do something for the small businesses as well. And for the small businesses, sort of the first level is, pass an ordinance saying there has to be space for recycling and space for organics in buildings. So any building that's new construction or permitted for a significant remodel in a single family or in the multifamily and commercial sector has to have space for recycling, adequate space for recycling. Recycling plans are in place in a number of communities, and requiring recycling bins along with multifamily trash service is another element that we recommend as part of this package. At a next level of intensity, the city provides technical assistance to individual businesses to help guide them to how they can recycle more, how they can divert organics, and so on. You have a web information service or web information and a hotline, and a recognition program that many businesses like. Usually a green star program, 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, or you're a green building or business. A number of communities have grants for the first 3 months of, services free or small businesses provided on residential service. Things like that are in place in a number of places. And the last one I wanted to recommend out of this little batch is clear invoicing, so that no longer can haulers provide bills that are completely unintelligible. You have no idea if your service is matching what you're being billed for. You have no idea, what your recycling service is. Make sure that there are codes that make it so that you must understand your bill. There are a number of communities with these kinds of programs in place, Portland, Boulder, and lots of others. The other really big bang program in terms of tonnage was the construction and demolition deposit system. This is a huge portion of your waste stream. You folks know that your community is growing. It definitely shows in your waste stream analysis. It is a massive component of your waste. The way that this program started in San Jose, California, they created this program, and it was a really interesting approach to handling C&D. What they did was they said, any person that comes in to get a building permit for construction or demolition, when they pull that permit, they must also leave a financial deposit. They must leave a financial deposit that varies on the following components. There's a factor that's based on a multiplier, and that multiplier is set whether you're new construction or remodel or demolition. So, and whether you're single family, multifamily, or commercial. So you get some number. You multiply that number times the number of square feet, and that's the amount of money you need to leave. So that program says that you can then reclaim those funds if you bring weight slips that demonstrate that you recycled or reused at least the 50% or other goal, as time goes on, the goal ratchets. And if you bring in weight slips that demonstrate that you met that, you get your financial deposit back. And you don't if you don't. So it's a financial incentive to recycle materials. Well, of course, weight slips can become complicated. So one of the very early steps is to get a facility for recycling C&D as part of the package of things that Chris will be talking about later on. Because it's a lot easier if a builder knows that if he brings the material to facility A, that facility is already been certified by the community to say, that city, or that facility meets our 50% goal. So you bring it there, you have met our package, and so our goal. So that's the sort of the way that the program evolves, and that's what we expect to see. You can ramp up the threshold. One of the things that you also do for administrative reasons is you might set a square footage threshold. Figure out what your square footage is usually, and omit, say, omit's not the right word, but in any case, the lowest 25%, and that's usually only about 10% of the waste. So you get rid of 25% of the administrative headache, and you only don't capture a small portion of the waste. So there are things like that to make the program really efficient and effective, and that's part of our planning as well.
Can I just ask a question there?
Please
So
do.
just to get an idea of how that works, can you give me a ballpark of how much, average house would be
Let's see, an average house, I think.
in the deposit program? I mean, are we talking about thousands of dollars, or are we, the deposit?
I'd rather not. I know some figures, but multiplying them times a 2,500 square foot house, and I don't think that's the right number, so I may have the commercial number in my mind. So if I can get back to you, I'd prefer.
Yeah, I'm just
Thank you.
curious because it's enough of a hassle that I can see big price elasticity on that.
Well, we want it to be enough of an incentive that they
Right.
actually do the behavior. So yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's in a number of communities from Florida to California. So there are ratios out there that have, or factors out there that have led to the change in behavior people were after. We don't have to start with ground zero. So that's the good part of it.
Yeah, I'm just
It's
curious.
an established program.
Thanks.
I'll get back to you. Can someone take a note about? Thank you. Okay. Great. Okay. One of the other things that delivers a fair chunk of tonnage, again, is this issue of providing more incentives. Using the market where we can, adjusting the market so that we provide incentives, leads to real changes in behavior. This next one is about adjusting the reflected ratio between trash and recycling at the landfill or the disposal site or the transfer station. Here, we provide a surcharge on trash so that the trash, whatever the trash market price is, you add to that so that trash becomes more expensive. You also forgive for instance, the sales tax or other things on some of the other streams. In between, especially with that surcharge, you ratchet up the price of trash relative to recycling. We've done studies on that in other states where they do have this kind of a program. And what we found was when you had a relatively high difference or surcharge established on it, we found that uptake on organics programs in those communities by commercial and institutional buildings was 3 times as high as in communities with small incentives. So this can really realign cost, realign behaviors, and get it so that more and more organics work is taken. So that's one of the other strategies that's in our package.
So Lisa, is that on both residential and commercial, or it doesn't matter? How does that, and what are the numbers that is enough of a surcharge to actually change behavior? Or at least the difference between what the surcharge and the forgiveness?
Again, I was running the regressions, and there was a threshold for high and low, and so I can tell you what you got from high. I don't recall what the high was. It's in the Minneapolis area, though, and again, I'm happy to. I'll look it up as I'm sitting here, if you like. So I'll give it a try. The last part was running regressions, not establishing the high-low, and that's what I remember. Sorry. Okay. Another thing that we don't have a lot of tons associated with because it's really difficult, but I'll tell you that but one of the key sectors and one of the sectors that you have a large number of multifamily buildings. You have not good performance from multifamily buildings, but the good news is, or I guess the the news is that nobody has very strong performance from the multifamily sector, despite 25 years of trying in leading cities around the country, Seattle, San Jose, San Francisco, Austin, everywhere. It's really difficult to get recycling out of the commercial sector, or the multifamily sector, for all the usual reasons. People don't have the responsibility of paying the bill. The generators are not the bill payers. There's transients. There's people, you don't live there very long, not long enough to feel like you belong. It's, education is complicated, and there's anonymity. If you do something bad, who's to find you? Big deal, right? So it's a really problematic sector. And this is one of the things that we have a two-stage program involved in this particular case. What we're talking about is, first, in the early stages, we'll run some multifamily pilots. We'll go out as it's an idea-based pilot program, a la what they did in Austin, Texas. And they said, they solicit ideas for what do haulers, what do you think you could do in order to get good performance out of the sector? Try a bunch of different ideas, and then go forward with those that provide the best performance. A lot of metrics in those early phases, and then roll out those programs that are best from the pilots and/or from lessons you've learned from other communities as well. It's really an important sector. It's very difficult. This is such a hard sector that actually San Jose decided to go with a dirty MRF because they could not get enough performance out of this sector, and that was a very controversial move. It may or may not be the best option, but definitely this idea-based option will show what can perform here in this community, and that's our goal.
So somebody will explain what a dirty MRF is versus a clean MRF, right?
Yes, what we're talking about there is you have a recycling program for the multifamily sector, but it doesn't perform very well. You take their trash, and you bring it to a MRF, and you sort the recyclables out of the trash. They were able to get to mid to high single digit double digit, like 15 to 19% from the multifamily sector after going to that kind of a program. Not a number that you're going, gosh, that's great, when they've got more than 50% out of the single-family sector. So it's even that, which was progress in their case, is not something you aspire to.
Charlottesville, Virginia did that too. Do you know if their numbers are any better?
I can't imagine, but maybe you know, Bob? 18, 19% there too. So
Chicago experimented with that, and 50%.
Yeah. And then some of these facilities are, started up and are no longer in business either. It's just not one of those facilities and programs that's your first choice. Some of the other strategies we want to make sure and mention are that we want to add materials to the collection. You saw strong support for glass. You saw strong support for some of the other materials. Textiles are another, as you saw, not insignificant portion of the waste stream. So we're talking here about a series of different materials that you add them to the recycling program, to a recycling program, and then you also ban them to provide that drive to get them diverted. And that's what this next group was. And then as a later project or program, we're talking about we could, in order to get additional efficiencies, consider residential contracts and franchises. And we're talking about that in both the residential sector and the commercial sector. Some of the reasons for considering that option are that it integrates services, it gets a more uniform program. You definitely get some cost savings from being able to have backup trucks and efficient routing and other things like that you can get from that system. It reduces wear and tear on the streets, and when you're not having haulers go up and down the same streets over and over again, and therefore it also reduces vehicle miles traveled and the associated greenhouse gas reductions, which is the G hiding under that slide. And there's a defined process for doing that, and we know about the steps. It takes some time, but and there are lots of tips for how you go about doing that to get the best possible bids, to get the best possible system out of it. And that can be a very long discussion, and we're happy to answer questions about that. One of the things is that you could have one hauler or you could have multiple haulers. This is a pretty large community. You could have multiple haulers, keep some competition going. You could set aside or carve out areas for small haulers, all kinds of different options to meet the variety of goals that you would have out of a system like this, should this be the one, should we not see the performance from some of the other options we're talking about and move toward this as well. Some of the other things that reach that second stage to get more out of the residential sector beyond the Save As You Throw programs are enhancing those incentives. So you start with some differential, you increase that differential to drive more, to drive that financial incentive to get people to divert more. And you also can do things like introduce things like no bin, no barrel every other week. That is in some communities in Maine and elsewhere. If you don't put out a recycling bin, you don't get your trash collected. If you really want to get aggressive, there are ways to get really aggressive if you're trying to get to the maximum amount of recycling. But even as a better program is to look at going to every other week trash collection. If you go to every other week trash collection, that has a number of advantages. If you have an organics program, and if you have that organics container also allow food, which is what we're talking about here, then you've no longer got putrescibles in the trash. So why do you need to collect trash weekly? You need to collect the putrescibles weekly, and that is now the organics bin. So going to every other week trash not only saves money, it also drives that last bit of putrescibles into the organics container, which is where you want it. I've looked at pilot after pilot on the food waste program side, and we find that if you have trash collected the same frequency or more frequently than the organics container, people have this mental mindset that the food goes into the trash and they don't put it into the organics bin. If you make organics more frequent than trash, then people move it into that proper bin, the bin that you want it to be in. Then it also saves costs because you're no longer collecting a whole stream every week. You're collecting it every other week. So those are some of the enhanced incentives that get that last bit of recyclables and organics out of the trash stream. We do a similar thing. We talk about a similar thing also in the commercial side. It's really hard to get, what we want to get is similar collection. We want to get not repeating, same thing, not multiple trucks down the street. If you want efficiencies, then contracting and franchising is a way to be looking. We think that also would drive significantly more tons. But it's not quite as easy as it is in the residential sector. There are laws and regulations about who can contract and how much you can interfere in the sector and other things like that. It's usually something that people go to later in the process. Seattle and some others have gone in that direction. Santa Barbara contracts for their commercial collection, for instance. It's less commonly implemented. The process will be less familiar or less commonly used than in other places. But given the organizational structure we're talking about, we think that that's a direction we can go with perhaps a little less complexity than we would if we didn't have this kind of a structure. You would also maybe allow for every other week collection of trash for the same kinds of reasons I'm talking about on the residential sector, and at a price break as well, similar to the res. Drop-off and convenience center access is something we want to improve. You can see on the dots here that we have a cluster. We have colored areas that show where the population is, and we have dots that show where the drop-offs are. And right now, the drop-offs seem to be a little bit on the east side of where the population is. And so if we wanted to have concentric circles that say even access for the different population centers, we would need one or more centers, potentially drop-offs, potentially on the western side of the area. And we might consider broadening materials as well. The population ratio that you have now, about 200,000 population to one center, is similar to other communities, but unfortunately they're not concentrated exactly where the population is, or not quite representative. That is my time exactly, and now the next speaker will be Bob Geddard from RRS, talking about the zero waste set of strategies. Thanks.
And greetings. I'm Bob Geddard, and I've been a consultant for 1.5 years, but prior to that, 40 years experience implementing programs in major cities like Fresno, California, Austin, Texas. So my perspective that I bring to you is that I'm bringing forward some zero waste programming above 75% to get you to 90%. But my background is how do you implement these programs? How do you bring these forward? It's not pie in the sky, but the pragmatic implementation strategies as well too. So that's the skill that I bring forward to you. Also, we bring these strategies forward to you. Lisa spoke on how to bring your diversion rate up to 75%. The programs that I bring to you will bring it to 90%, but they dovetail neatly in stacking order with the programs that Lisa just talked about. They build upon each other, and I'll mention that as well, too. Also, these above 75% strategies can also be implemented while building up to 75%. You don't have to wait on a time period. They can be implemented earlier. They can be built in when the available funding is there, or when the interest is available for that particular topic. So they're not necessarily timed on the calendar there. The programs that I have in our report for the above 75% strategies to 90% include 10 city policies and ordinances, 5 economic development activities, and some public education tools. I'm not going to mention all of them at this moment in time. I'm going to feature some key programs that bring you to 90%, but we don't have the time to mention all of them, so I'll mention some key programs there. The programs that I'm going to mention are public education and outreach. You have public education and outreach on an ongoing basis for any type of recycling and waste diversion, waste reduction. I'm going to mention above 75% type strategies on public education and outreach. Also, I'm going to mention Metro's construction and recycling content ordinance as I look at it, a deconstruction and reuse ordinance, food donations, and recycling economic development as strategies to reach 90%. I also have a section on model communities utilizing these strategies as examples to look at. Working on public education and outreach, what cities that generally are diving in on waste diversion, working on recycling programs, working on household hazardous waste collection, working on various different front lines with the public, we layer in, and myself included in my career, we layer in different public education programs, different outreach programs, different types of literature and so forth, and they layer in different types of program literature, radio spots, different types of education programs, and they become very confusing messages to the public. And the one thing I've learned over my career is that you need to create a vision for your education and outreach, and you need to build a messaging platform. And when you're reaching upward towards that 75% level, you need to combine all your messaging into one platform. You don't have to wait till you're at 75%. You could do this a little earlier, but it's very critical that when you're up at the 75% echelon and you're trying to move to a diversion rate above 75%, it is far, far more difficult to create more diversion when you have a scattered approach on public education. Particularly when you're reaching out to the commercial and industrial sectors as well as the general public, you need a centralized vision, a centralized approach. And I've spoke at great length with Brenda Poli of Keep America Beautiful on their approach to public education. There's a tremendous amount of public motivation research that Keep America Beautiful has done, and they are a great resource that you can pull into your community on public messaging. So my point there is to avoid the individual program messaging as early as you can in your programming. Unify the messaging. Work towards measuring behavior changes before and after creating new messaging. Try to measure. It is very, very difficult to measure the public impact on the types of public messaging that you do, whether it's radio, TV, billboard, or any type of literature, your outreach program, your school education. It's hard to measure, and it's good that when you're contemplating changes to do before and after measurements. and experiment with different themes and find what theme works. I've worked with an advertising group that centered around a lot of research, Madison Avenue type advertisers, and what their advice was to corporations that spent money on advertising and moving their product off the store shelves was to work on a 10-year platform of a theme, a theme that they can work with and have different types of messaging coming out of that theme. When I worked for the city of Austin, I was the department director for solid waste for 8 years in Austin, and I created the RE theme where we used RE in front of everything: rethink, reuse, recycle. We had a different educational campaign every year with the RE, and we were able to educate the public using the RE theme. And you can steal that or you create your own. But the nice thing about a government is you can steal government ideas from any government city or county throughout the country, and it's not plagiarism. So I think the main point is to be creative, but to be unified throughout the decade and so forth. My last point there is annual budgets. In city government, county government, even state governments, there is the push to have stable annual government budgets. In talking to advertising executives, talking to KB and their advice, working with other communities on education budgets, you make in a new campaign, you make a large splash at the beginning, you stabilize in the middle, and then you slowly reduce your expenditures at the end. If you've got a 10-year campaign, much of the money is in the first 4 years. And then in the middle, you stabilize, and then you reduce your expenditures towards the tail end because you've delivered the campaign message over time, and then you're just reminding the public on the tail end. And so there is a reduction in expenses over time. Much of the impact is on the first 3-4 years. And it's important to budget that way. What I did in Austin to maintain a level budgeting approach with my city council is as I changed my public education expenditures up or down each year, I varied my capital expenditures to balance with my public education. So if the public education expenditures went down, I was able to spend more on capital expenditures and vice versa. So they balanced each other so that I had a level city budget. And my city manager knew what I was doing. I wasn't nothing behind closed doors. Some model communities to look at is Alameda County, California, and King County, Washington. They have very good public motivation and education programs there. Model construction project, metro construction projects for recycled content ordinance. This is where you practice what you preach. Lisa mentioned a C&D ordinance where you're talking to the general contractor base on recycling construction waste out in the general business community. Here is where you're talking about city and county government construction projects. This could be a building construction, or it could be sidewalk and street construction. This is setting recycled content levels for building materials, setting standards for the reuse of glass, concrete, asphalt, and residual plastics. An example is taking some of the honky-tonk glass and using it as aggregate in sidewalks, and perhaps if there's a rebuilding platform at the airport, maybe using some of that glass in the tarmac and at the airport. Requiring the use of compost on road projects, hillside stabilization. That's a great need for compost material. Model communities that have set up these types of programs is Austin, Seattle, and San Francisco. There's a great need to practice this type of material in government contracts and government set-aside projects to show the private sector it can be done. And I think that's showing some leadership. This is above 75% strategy, but it can be moved up on the time scale if you have the funding ability and the ability to move it on your timetable there. Also, in that realm of thinking on construction, deconstruction, the demolition of homes, this is a revision to the construction and demolition ordinance concept. You run the C&D ordinance for a few years, stabilize the markets for the construction and ordinance, but at some point consider a deconstruction and reuse ordinance. It will not gain you a lot of diversion. It will gain you some, but the concept is to get diversion in the reuse category. Sharon mentioned earlier in her report, earlier in your meeting, the 3 R's. We focus too quickly on reuse, but we often forget about waste reduction and reuse. And this is introducing reuse into a C&D ordinance. Difficult to do at the initial stage of developing a C&D ordinance. I'm suggesting that at a later stage you revise the C&D ordinance and introduce deconstruction, repair, reuse, and recycling of valuable materials before the demolition of a building. And a model community would be Berkeley, California, and they contract out to Urban Ore, a nonprofit in Berkeley, to demolish a building. Before it's demolished by a contractor, Urban Ore goes in and takes out copper pipes, sinks, window cases, doors. They take it to their reuse center and they resell the material. And it's a nonprofit reuse system. Also, in Austin, the Austin community created a new standard within their C&D ordinance. It's similar to the LEED criteria. Any building constructed within the city, it's not just a voluntary standard for meeting LEED, but they put in mandatory minimum requirements similar to the LEED criteria for construction of buildings. This was integrated into any building that receives federal, state, or city funding. So if a contractor is receiving government assistance, they receive LEED criteria. Same is true on the demolition and integrated into the C&D ordinance as well too. And I actively note to you that engage and seek technical advice. I note Bill Turley of Construction and Demolition Recycling Association out of Chicago as a great aid. I've known him a couple of decades, and he offers a lot of technical advice for free. And as you develop the C&D ordinance and you revise it in the above 75% strategies, there's organizations, nonprofit organizations like Recycling Certification Institute that can certify diversion activities in the C&D destruction and reuse activities. So those are a few added points. And then most recently, with some of the hurricane activities of note, there's a lot of activity on storm debris management. And even inland, as far as Nashville, you have the effects, inland storms as the effect of some of these hurricanes. And many people think of storm debris management as tree branches and brush and so forth and flooding effects. But there's a lot of building destruction that happens in many of those storms. And a C&D ordinance or an expanded C&D ordinance through deconstruction ordinance can handle much of that debris and direct that debris into a reuse and recycling format. So it's something to consider there as well too. Food recovery and waste reduction. Nashville as a whole encountered and embraced the NRDC challenge and worked with a pilot. And I'm recommending that you expand that NRDC challenge, the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, to include grocers like Kroger's and retailers like Target and Walmart, cafes, cafeterias, caterers, and food producers to create a higher level of diversion, promote waste reduction for residents. I'll get to that point in just a second, but there's a lot of model communities that are working with NRDC on this food challenge, and I think that there is some highlighted features for Nashville in that success of that pilot, and I wouldn't let that pilot collect dust. I think you've got some bragging points on that pilot, and I think moving forward with that pilot into a broad-based expansion would really work well in your 75% diversion category there. Lisa mentioned landfill ban of organics in her work in part of her list of activities, and I would highly recommend that you work on a food waste reduction education program, part of the education and outreach that I mentioned earlier, and do so before the landfill ban, because it's important to get food waste reduction and food recovery for human consumption, an ordinance like Good Samaritan ordinance for food that is healthy to reuse and redistribute from grocers and from residents to work on waste reduction. Get that conversation in the community before we start talking about composting and eliminating from the trash. People move straight from this is food waste, I need to throw it in the compost. They move that to that composter so quickly without thinking about, is this edible for somebody else? Is this, is this banana blemished at the grocery store and I just need to throw it in the compost? Or can somebody eat this at a homeless shelter tonight? So there could be alternative measures that can be discussed and implemented before we get into composting. And so I suggest that. And that's one of the lessons that is integrated into the NRDC report that could be mentioned and worked on in an ordinance. The ordinance I mentioned, the Food Recovery Ordinance, is simply a Good Samaritan Act where it embraces the concept and works with the health department to educate the public on what can and cannot be done on redistribution of food, because there are safety issues that need to be addressed as well. And the last point on this is model communities, San Diego and Boston. I just want to mention San Diego worked with their airport for food waste reduction and composting. Every airport has food vendors for the passengers. There's food servers at the airports, and the food servers have a tremendous amount of food waste, higher than normal downtown restaurants. And they have a tremendous diversion rate at the San Diego airport for composting food waste. And they expanded that composting program to include a traveler's donation. When travelers are going through the TSA line, there's certain food and drinks that they cannot take through the TSA check line, and much of it is edible. So they've set up some donation setup checkpoints, and the food is donated to the USO for redistribution to U.S. troops. And that's the photo indicates, and it's a tremendous success. And they received a U.S. EPA Food Waste Reduction Award last year for that program. And the second example is Boston, Massachusetts, where they're working with software developer. There was a free software program called Spoiler Alert that was given to all the grocery stores as a pilot, and the brand name is Spoiler Alert, and it's an inventory alert system based on expiration date of groceries and produce that may expire in freshness, and it's the freshness dates. And the grocers check through that software and know when food is about to expire, and they work with the local food pantry for donation of the food if it's still not sold. And so it's a way of redistributing the food before it's spoiled on their shelves. And they received an EPA grant, an EPA award for that program as well. So a couple of examples there. Recycling economic development. How am I doing on time there? Okay. Okay. Recycling economic development is something that I want to emphasize as a unique tool that can really boost your diversion rate, and often is a tool once you reach 75%. You got some basic tools that Lisa mentioned in building up your recycling and composting programs, and recycling economic development is a way to take the circular economy into a local economy, taking the concept of locally generated recycled materials and generating local jobs using economic development tools. And each city that I've talked to that about this has their own approach to this. This could be a molded concept to your own area, depending on the economic tools that are available to you. The recommendation that I have is to build a new job position within your own economic development area. It may be out of the mayor's office, it might be out of an economic development office, but build a job position that specifically deals with promoting recycling through economic development. In Austin, I created a recycling economic development liaison. That's the title, and Natalie Betts sits in that position, and what she does is use economic development tools to bring in new businesses into the city to process or develop new products out of the recyclables that are generated within the city. The concept is also to promote and support businesses that are already within the city that support the zero waste goals. So it's a two-way street there. Part of a recycling economic development program is to offer rebates encouraging regional zero waste businesses, encouraging a website that lists businesses that are engaged in zero waste practices, creating a mayor's award or a recognition program. Join a materials exchange network, such as the Tennessee Materials Exchange Network, as we were speaking earlier today. Materials Exchange Network is a way to engage the business and community in exchanging waste materials, what they would consider waste materials that might be a raw material for another business. It's a reuse of a material that might end up in a landfill, but in a materials exchange becomes a new raw material in another setting. Promote research and development in recycling technologies, where you could work with the local universities and create new synergies. You look at a target materials in your waste stream that are going to the landfill, find a material that is in high percentage going to the landfill that is not recyclable or compostable with current technologies, and say, challenge your local universities. Find a way to divert this material. Can it be composted? Can it be recycled? If it cannot be in today's technologies, can the product or the package be redesigned? Can you challenge the manufacturer of this product to redesign it with a greener design? A quick example was the 2-liter bottle when it was first introduced in the 80s, had a stabilizer black cap on the bottom of it. It made it totally unrecyclable, and the bottling companies wanted it recycled. Well, a $50,000 grant to the Battelle Institute, sorry, it was Ohio State University, sorry, but a $50,000 grant, 90-day limitation to the grant, and the unibody structure of the 2-liter bottle that you see today was designed within that 90 days, and it's a patent blow-modeled design and that patent design is owned by the US EPA and licensed out for free to any bottle manufacturer, and it is completely recyclable. And that redesign cost $50,000. That's it. And those bottle manufacturers weren't going down that line until that grant was offered to a university research lab. So think about something like that locally here. It breaks open new opportunities. Financial support for a remanufacturing hub. This can happen in many different formats. You can take an old industrial site, a closed-down industrial site, and rehab it into a remanufacturing hub, a vacant lot of land, a closed-down landfill, rehab it into a remanufacturing hub. A concept of a remanufacturing hub is bringing in industries, light industries that can take raw material, recycling, local, commercial, industrial, and residential recyclables, and manufacture new products out of it. You're bringing those manufacturers to town, new jobs. You're closing the loop. You're not shipping the plastics and the fiber and the other materials to China. You're shipping it here and making new products here with new jobs. That's the concept, the general concept of a remanufacturing hub. Austin is developing one of those and did a call for bids on companies that might be interested. There's 12 sites at their remanufacturing hub. They have 21 interested parties for those 12 sites. Edmonton, Alberta has a developed site that's operational, and Phoenix, Arizona has an operational site. So those are three model communities that you can take a look at.
Do they already have the end product in mind when they established the remanufacturing hub?
In Edmonton, yes. In Phoenix, no. They just looked for whoever was interested. In Austin, Natalie and I were basically looking at targeted materials as we saw them in the waste stream. So we
Meaning you looked at what you had and you put it out there saying, can anybody make anything with this?
Yes. That was the Austin approach.
Did it work?
Yes. For the interested parties, the 21 interested parties, yes, they're answering that issues. Yes.
And so what's one example of something that you had a lot of that someone made something with, and what was it?
Plastics 3 through 7 that are fairly difficult to market was one of those. And glass being marketable but at a distance. We wanted a local market for glass. Those are two examples.
And so the end product was resin or like a fleece sweatshirt?
We were open to any type of markets, and we found multiple different ideas. One of the ideas was plastics to oil, where the fuel product would be sold to city trucks as a fuel. That was one concept.
Now, is this product development part of a partnership with, like, University of Texas?
All of them were independent, developed ideas, not along that line, but I was completely open to that opportunity. Yeah. I have, to round out the slides that I have 3 cities to feature real quickly, and then some best practices. Austin, Texas, a favorite city of mine. Just a few points in the development of their master plan. They moved from a zero waste plan to a department master plan, and had hundreds of cities participate in quite a few community meetings in 2010 for the plan development. They went out to the community for community input, and they did a cyber town hall meeting, web-based cyber meeting that had about 1,000 people on the web. which included some phone calls as well, too. So that was kind of interesting concept. Universal access to recycling service. It's the Universal Recycling Ordinance, and often referred to as URO, and it requires, every building in the city is required to have recycling service to it. Industrial, commercial, institutions, government buildings, residents, multifamily, everybody has to have recycling service. It's not mandated to be used as a recycling service, but they have to provide it to the tenants of that building. The next step that City Council is aware of, it's an above 75% strategy for Austin, is mandated service if they don't reach a certain a level of diversion at that facility. So it's facility by facility mandated service if they're not reaching a certain targeted level. But the current ordinance does not require use of the service. It's working on the principle of build it and they will come type thought pattern there. And it's working. Waste composition studies that form the basis of new collection programs. So did a waste composition study, 24% of what's going to the landfill is food waste. 26% of what's going to the landfill is compostable paper. That's 50% of what's going to the landfill that can go into an organics collection program. So Austin's building an organics collection program. So they're building new programs based upon a waste composition study. And then economic development through the circular economy concept of building local jobs. That's some of the principles of Austin. Moving to Edmonton, Alberta, I already mentioned their Edmonton Waste Management Center. That's their equal development. Their local Center for Economic Development, and they have. Last time I talked to them, I think they have 15 businesses that are located there, and it's a private-public partnerships. And they're creating synergies. You can see by the arrows that different businesses are creating synergies where different material flows follow to the various different facilities. And they have their MRF and their composting operations on the same site. So they're trying to create a central site. And let me see. Just to highlight a couple of things, they have an aerobic digestion facility that processes 52,000 tons of organic waste on that site. They have a partnership with between the University of Alberta and the City of Edmonton for experimental organics composting on that site. They have a partnership with Global Electric and Electronic Processing to disassemble discarded computers, televisions, and electronic waste, and they recently processed 33,000 tons of electronic waste in the last year. So that's just a small bit of what they're doing at that site. It's pretty well developed.
This is all this that you're showing on this is in one
site.
chunk of land.
It's one piece of land.
Wow.
And I fail to remember how many acres it is. It's fairly large, but I don't remember how many acres it is.
I'd like to point out they also have really nice access.
What's that? Oh, yes. They have the financing for this that I did not have in Austin.
Well, they used to until the tar sands started going belly up.
They do generate electricity from their power station on that site, and it is a city-owned site. Yes. And San Francisco, California, I was pretty impressed. Very extensive multilingual door-to-door outreach. They found that they were not reaching their diversion goals through a massive outreach campaign, the more traditional outreach. So they decided to do door-to-door, including multifamily. And so it's door knocking. They expanded their outreach staff to 12. They hired 12 outreach staff, and they go door to door to every single residence. And they, for 12 staff, and 2 years ago, they added staff to do business outreach. 2 years ago. I'm not sure how many staff they added for the business outreach.
And Sharon, how many staff do you have right now?
I've got one.
Okay, that's, sorry to interrupt there, Bob.
And
but just-
very, very productive.
And for size comparison, about 800,000 in San Francisco, residents.
It's a very small space.
Yeah.
Much smaller than our county.
Yeah. So they have 12 reaching out to all the residents, and more staff for the business community. They also inspect curbside bins throughout the city. They initially set that up without a fine structure. They now do fines for contamination of recycling. They offer a sign maker tool to residents. You'll see a small picture of that. I did a screenshot down at the bottom. This is the sign maker tool is basically you can go on their website and you can cut and you can actually move over. You can see on the far left side graphics of different recyclables, and you can move those graphics over into the center part of that blue spot of that sign. You can make a sign with different recyclables. You can put in different words. You can put in your corporate logo. If it's a multifamily setting, you can put in the name of the community, and you can make your own sign, hit the print button, and post those signs at the multifamily setting or your business. If it's a cafeteria, wherever, you can make your own sign, print it out, and show your tenants what is recyclable in your community. They call that the sign maker tool, and it's available to anybody that goes to that website. And I might add that any community outside of San Francisco can use that too, because I have used it. They do prioritize education and outreach rather than impose the fines. They give 3 or 4 education outreaches before they impose any fines. I did mention fines earlier, but they encourage that education and outreach long before they do the fines. And then finally, they launched a Recycleware website. You can plug in any street address, and they'll note whether you get curbside recycling or not, and where the nearest recycling drop-off is. It's a search tool, basically, and what you can recycle at those locations. My final slide, best practices. I have a list of 20 best practices in my report. I just narrowed this down for sake of time, some of the best practices that I've noted in the different communities that I've worked in. The City Council adopts zero waste plan with annual funding. That's very key. You can adopt a goal, you can adopt the concept, but with annual funding is very key there. Practices highest and best use hierarchy. That's key to have in your zero waste plan. A highest and best use, and highest and best on the top of the rank is waste reduction, and then reuse, and then recycling and composting. And landfilling and any disposal method is at the bottom of that hierarchy. So it's important to build your programs with that hierarchy in mind. Use of local economic development tools for support of zero waste. I have found that to be in at least 25 communities that I've looked at. It's a growing trend. Everybody looks at it in a different format, in a different way, because their economic tools may be varying from city to city, but I am finding that that's a growing approach. Recycling and composting ordinance requiring access or requiring usage of recyclables and compostables collection, support for local reuse collection systems. I would encourage you to take a look at the reuse collection systems in your city, like thrift stores, antique stores. They are a great resource. No need to duplicate that. They are great, and count what they do if you can get tonnages, because that should be part of your diversion rate. Reuse is diversion. And requiring city departments to prevent waste, maximize recycling, and buy recycled content. It's important to practice what you preach within city departments. One quick story on that. In Austin, I challenged all the city departments. There's 36 city departments in Austin. I challenged them all to work on waste reduction and recycling and composting. And I said the best of the best will be paraded in front of city council and the mayor, and we'll give out awards each year. And I always thought that my department would be the best. I always thought that, you know. Well, my department, year after year after year, was number 3 in the city. Year after year after year. I could never get my department higher than number 3. Number 1 was Convention Center at 76% diversion. And number 2 was the police department at 75% diversion. And my department at 62% diversion. And the Convention Center was composting food waste and working on food waste reduction because they're in charge of food meal preparation for all their convention goers, and they were able to work on reduction through smart meal planning in their conventions. And they worked on food waste prevention as well as composting of food waste. And they also captured recyclables in the hallways from their convention goers, and they were very proactive at it. Convention Center number 1. The police department took the challenge, and they really were proactive on recycling. So challenge your city departments. And I leave it at that. Any other questions?
Well, questions? I'm getting the sign, and I think what we're going to do is take a 10-minute break now. But we're going to keep it at 10 minutes because I have 6:08 on my clock. And so 6:18 we are going to reconvene and continue the presentation. Right?
I have the answers to those 2 questions for 2 seconds. The one is the incentive or the extra landfill surcharge is on the order of equal to or 1.5 times the amount of the landfill fee, so pretty substantial. And on the amount that's charged for construction, the deposit, it's on the order of 40 cents in San Diego. It's 40% for residential new construction. That would mean for a 2,000 square foot home, it would be about $800. 40 cents, thank you.
40 cents.
40 cents per square foot. So it would be about $800 for a 2,000 square foot home. And it's 20 cents per square foot for non-residential, way more square feet, so.
Yeah, San Jose is similar. I looked it up. San Jose is 20 cents residential, 10 cents non-residential.
Thanks.
Okay, 10 minutes. Hey, everybody, we're getting ready to start.
All right, Chairman says let's go.
That means you, Mr. Deal. Yes, so we forgot that actually one of our board members was supposed to bring some paletas tonight, but Miss Vanessa. We'll have to wait for some. They'd be melted by now, you're right. So we're going into the second half of the presentation, and Martin has assured me it might not take quite as much time. However, there's some really important pieces in this, so let's not skip over everything.
We got a little bit of the first part. We're going to talk a couple minutes about facilities, and then we're going to get into, we talked a lot about programs. We're going to start talking a little bit about where the diversion is going to occur in terms of sectors, sort of a little bit of timing. We also have we have an aggressive and a moderate and conservative strategy for getting to these diversion levels. Lisa will talk a little bit about that. And then we'll get into talking a little bit about programs. And then at the end, we'll talk about policies and funding. So we'll kind of keep moving through instead of having another break.
Okay, so we can start with a brief discussion here on facilities. A couple things we just want to remind you that as we're getting into these high diversion processes that we're going to be doing, there's a lot of additional capacity that is going to be required, as all this material that was previously going to the landfill is now going to be heading to other places. So I want to remind you, just taking a look at some of the existing facilities that you have out there, and some of these are better known than others, but the River Hills facility that Waste Management runs takes the majority of or actually all the single stream. And then there's a lot of single source type materials that are recycled here as well. There is some room for additional capacity based over what they're currently operating at. But when you compare it to the numbers that we're looking at for the next 5 to 10 years, these numbers are far exceeding these. So as you do that, you're going to see that a lot of additional facilities need to come online. So these are ones for organic capacity right now, and certainly a great need in that area as well. And the last reminder here is that when you look at landfilling, the situation is going to change, is going to also affect the economics as far as how these other facilities, in particular, if you're looking at this from enhancement or enticing private development, it's going to change because the landfills are going to be farther away. The haul costs are going to go up. There may be impacts regarding fuel costs, too, in the future. It's not well known at this time. But in that sense, the landfill moving from Rutherford County to farther out does work to our advantage in trying to divert from the landfill. That's really the point we're trying to make here. There's great incentive to do it because the time frame for Rutherford is not really that long. So as far as the way we're looking at the program, this is the time the plan should be implemented, and the timing is very good for that. So we can start. I wanted to talk now more about the diversion modeling itself, what we've looked at. All these strategies that we've been talking about in the first session have been input into a model so that we can determine what the diversion rate is and how that affects over time and how you phase those programs in. So that's what we're going to have Lisa talk about that. You good? Okay.
Okay. The strategies that we've grouped into in a couple of ways. We've stratified them based on a phasing approach. So in some cases, some programs are going to be able to be implemented fairly quickly. Others, and we're looking for things that are easy to implement, very visible, and sort of set the stage for continued progress. Stage 3 ones are going to be the ones, or phase 3 ones are going to be the ones that are the most difficult, the longest to implement, ones that maybe take some facility building and other things in order to be ready to be implemented. And phase 2 ones are the ones that are sort of in between, ones that provide some next steps, have some big gains, but some of them take a little more time than those phase 1 ones. We also have 3 scenarios. And the scenarios have to do with how aggressively the area is willing to move forward. How, is Metro and Nashville area willing to take on just conservative strategies that maybe are quite easy to implement, very straightforward, don't go deep into new authorities or deep into new markets. Are they willing to go aggressive, which is going to be what it takes in order to get to the 75% threshold? Are they going to be willing to take on significant strategies that require perhaps a little bit more in the mandates area and require more and more sophisticated partnerships and so on? So those are sort of some of the ways we've stratified these approaches, and you'll see a little bit about those coming forward. So in this first graph, I'm trying to show what is the tonnage, so the percent of the diversion that is associated with the Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Phase 1 is the lightest color, which is a very pale gray, which apparently comes out pretty close to white on this graph. Phase 2 is the next darkest color, and that's over in the lower right-hand corner. You can see that's still quite light. That doesn't have very many tons associated with it, but it really sets the stage. It allows the Phase 1 programs to grow, and it also sets the stage for the Phase 3 and 4 programs. Phase 3 is the biggest group, and that's that next darkest gray, and the very darkest gray up in the upper left, or the top, is Phase 4, which is just a few programs, but it's also really important and some of the most complicated programs to implement. The next way I wanted to sort of to explain the programs was, what about by scenario? What if we're only willing to really go as far as the really conservative programs, the ones that don't really get too involved in markets and so on? Well, then you would see about the percentage of tons that are based on the gray area. If you were willing to go with the moderate strategies, then you add in the blue area that's on the left. But if you're willing to go to aggressive, that's when you get the entire ring of strategies, and you bring in the red. The one that's the odd color there in the upper left, the orange, is a combination of gray and red, and it's that a few of the new recyclable materials are introduced in the moderate strategy, and some of them are more aggressive, and they're in the red strategies, so they're a combination color. Okay. So you can see that by only going with the conservative approach, you would only get about a third of the tons that we're looking to achieve. And so it really does require going to something that impacts additional markets, something that affects additional stakeholders, and requires partnerships, authorities, and so on. I wanted to look at it also by sector. How much are we getting? We want to diversify who we get this from. We don't want, we don't want everything to be coming from the res sector, or really putting too undue an effort on, say, the commercial sector or so on. Everyone should share in the responsibilities because everybody generates. So in this case, we show that commercial, which is construction and demolition, is the gray area. You can see that's really an important sector. You can see that the commercial sector, which is the orangish, peachish area, that's also really important, a really big share of what we're looking at. The residential sector, blue, is also important, but you've made some progress there. The purple represents a combination of residential and commercial. So you can see if you look at residential and commercial and add that to the res, you can see that residential is also hit quite significantly. So we've really tried to share the responsibility among all the sectors with the programs that we're proposing in that 75% batch.
Can you remind us, while we're looking at this, what percentage of our overall waste flow was commercial? Wasn't it 70-something% that was coming from?
70-30 is the
it's about
factor we're using.
70-30? Okay, thanks.
The next one is looking at by material. So we have recycling, we have organics, we have construction and demolition, and so this shows what we're getting of those different materials. You can see here, construction and demolition is an important part. It's getting it's again, I colored it gray, so you can see that there's a significant share of what we're talking about that's C and D. Green is pure organics, but the purple includes both organics and recycling. So in the most part, we're getting both the organics and recycling stream in a big way. In this one, we're talking about how do we split those tons by sort of responsibility area. Is the city going to have an ongoing role in a particular set of programs? If so, that's the gray area, and you can see those clustered over in the right-hand side. If it's mostly market, if the market is really who's ultimately got the ongoing responsibility in that area, that's the deep blue. You can see that the middle blue is the shared, and a lot of the programs are going to have some role for the city and some market share in how that program is delivered and executed ongoing. And the city itself, or the metro itself, purely responsible is a fairly small sector. This one is, I thought, I spent 3 years as a city staffer in solid waste. I spent 10 years as an elected official, and I spent 30-plus years as a consultant, so I know it also matters who pays. So in this particular graph, we can see that sort of who's really paying for the services or these new programs and the increased cost. If it's a cost that accrues mostly to the city, that's in red. If it's a cost that's mostly market, that's deep blue, and the purples are the ones that really have a payment coming from both groups. This is the majority of. It's not that there's zero cost for the other element in any of the programs, but this is where the bulk of the program costs ultimately lie. So yes, some lie with Metro and the city, but some of it, but in a large case, it's really a change in behavior and a change in costs by the generators. Here we're talking about the progress that you make in tonnage over time. So this graph shows how much tons, the percent of tons that you achieve by fiscal year. So going across the bottom is fiscal years. And I note the phases. The first bullet says phase 1, and that starts in fiscal year 19, goes out to fiscal year 22. And you see we get a significant bump from over our current recycling rate of 13%, and move that up. Phase 2 sees some increase, and then phase 3 is when you track aggressive versus moderate versus conservative. You can see there's a dramatic increase in how much extra tonnage you get from the aggressive strategies in a completely different format than the circular pie chart way of showing. To get to 75% total between existing diversion and the new diversion, it really does take taking on some very aggressive, some of the more aggressive strategies that we noted in the picture. We also care about costs. Here's tracking the costs to the city over time across the fiscal years. The blue graph shows what it costs for the high performance, that is, those strategies getting you to 75%. For the red graph, that's adding in the costs over time of the zero waste strategies. So you can see that the costs for high-performance strategies are not zero. The left-hand side is talking about millions of dollars per year. But and that gets you to 75%. It's 62% new diversion tons, or about $6 million a year at the high end. When you add in the zero-waste strategies, there's decreasing returns to scale. It costs proportionally more to get the last tons. You go with the cheapest tons first, and you make the more complex tons later on. You get this first 62% new tons cost you about $6 million. It costs you about $6 million more to get 15% more tons. So it's about 4 times as expensive per ton for those zero waste adders. Here's what you see. The bottom line here is, under the aggressive strategy, what does it cost per ton? So it notes how many tons, what the cost is per year on a $1 million basis, and the phased costs per ton for the aggressive strategies for getting to 75%. So it ends up costing you about $8 per ton for phase 1, about $15 a ton for phase 2, and then phase 3 and 4, where you start getting some real market approaches, and you also include some bans and that sort of thing. The cost is not really high per ton at that phase, but it's a lot of tons. So it's not that the budget is zero, but the cost per ton is a pretty good value for those tons. There's a lot of other work that's been going on as well, and you'll see other products moving forward. But the next element is, how do we make this happen? Martin?
Thank you, Lisa. And I meant to say something before, right after the break, and I didn't. And the most important thing is this whole presentation is going to be put online. We're going to have access to it all. I mean, everybody's going to have access to it, so that's important for everybody to remember. And I'll remember the other thing and interrupt you when I do mine.
That's fine. Because we're going to have plenty more time, because we're basically to the end, and it's not going to take me that long.
I know. So I did remember the other thing, is that tomorrow, remember that there's also the community meeting. And I know that, Sharon, has she stepped out? Yeah, so I know that it's going to be structured a little bit different than in the past meetings, and so, folks, there's going to be an opportunity for more engagement.
Correct.
And I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but that's just important. However, I think it's only a 2-hour meeting. Is that right?
It is 3 hours. It's from 10 to 1 o'clock.
Okay.
There'll be, at the initial part, there'll be a little summary update. Will not be can't be as long as what we're giving you today, but it'll be a shortened summary of that. And then we're going to get into breakout sessions where the task force members have been given a choice of kind of topics that they want to sit around and discuss. C&D is one of the topics, recycling. What's the other one? Organics, yep, and facilities and large uses.
So, Martin, can you remind everybody where the meeting is going to be?
That's a good question.
Oh, the Cumberland Compact, Cumberland River Compact. Okay, great, thank you. All right. I won't interrupt you again.
Oh, no. Like I said, hey, we got plenty of time now. All right, so what we've talked about a lot here we've talked about programs, and Lisa mentioned this at the beginning in terms of, what is critical, the authorities, the ability to implement programs, the ability to establish ordinances, the ability to have the funding. All of these things are critical. And as you can see, what she was talking about in terms of programs, everything we're talking about, we're looking at the aggressive approach to get there as fast as you can. But with and without authority, even under the aggressive, if you don't have the authority, we're down to around 50% versus 75% if we don't have, all of the authorities that we're looking for to implement these programs. And then if you drop down to the moderate and the conservative, you can see without authority, we're not gaining a whole lot from the 13% where we are now. So, trying to add that additional 62% diversion is really dependent upon authorities and policies. And so some of the policies that we think are critical in order for this solid waste master plan to be successful is to be able to deliver consistent services across the entire county. So you're having consistent service delivery, consistency in what the requirements are, consistency in reporting, metrics, everything being consistent instead of having something different for the USD than for the GSD. Obviously, we talked a lot about cost and funding, and so having a long-term sustainable funding source is going to be critical. Right now, we have the funding dynamics of a tax base for the USD and then subscription services, subscription fees out in the GSD. So in order to be able to implement, licensing and household fees, we need that ability to be able to say we can budget for X amount each fiscal year and be dependent upon that money coming in the door. And then uniform implementation. We want to be able to have things go out countywide. We want to be able to cross USD and GSD boundaries. So we're trying to figure out how can we eliminate those boundaries and be cost effective and efficient in how we roll programs out. And it also helps drive participation levels. We also want to look at the residential and commercial collection. A lot of what Lisa was talking about in terms of save as you throw, franchising, contracting haulers, to be able to do that across the boundaries is critical in order to be efficient in how we roll these programs out and how effective we are in getting to the diversion rates we're looking for. Being able to have disposal bans on targeted materials. We have some now, but as the program continues to roll out and as the program grows, there'll be an increasing number of materials that we want banned from landfill disposal. And so we need to be able to implement those ordinances and implement those policies across the entire jurisdiction. And then ultimately, what may be, a future idea is to have it be a, regionally implemented program. And when you look at the facilities, whether you need a material recovery facility or if you're looking at a C&D recycling facility or composting facilities, if they're there to serve regionally, that's a benefit to Metro. One, you can put them in, they may be in another county or another area that has more open land that's more suitable for a large facility, or just being able from a cost-effective standpoint have more tonnages come into that facility to make processing each ton of that material a little less in cost. And also give us the opportunity to create more public and private partnerships. So right now, basically what the Solid Waste Management Act of 1991 legislatively says is that solid waste activities have to be funded either through a special revenue fund or an enterprise fund. Currently, the Public Works Department's funding for solid waste is basically all done through a special revenue fund. And then we also have the Metro Code, which has a tiered structure on the taxes. So you have a USD tax and you have a GSD tax. And you have residential and commercial services in the USD instead of the GSD. And so what's happening from a program funding standpoint is that the program revenues, in other words, what you get back for charging for additional surcharges on MSW or on C&D or fees that you're collecting, that's only about 22% of the operating revenues for the program. The rest of it is coming from the general fund. So with 78% of your funding, we couldn't move forward with this aggressive approach for how we get to zero waste, being dependent upon 78% of the program revenues coming from the general fund. That just won't be a consistent, viable solution to be successful. So that's, one of the key things that we want to talk about and consider. So the funding challenges going forward are obviously obtaining long-term sustainable funding, looking at the fact that the general fund, there's always somebody that needs money from the general fund, so you're always going to have competing interests, whether it's schools, whether it's fire, whether it's police, there will always be that. So you have that limitation, and then we also have the limitation of expanding fees into the USD would require a charter amendment. And there's some other structural impediments to, really broadening out the base of funding that we need in order for the program to be successful. We've also mentioned earlier, the lack of revenue-generating facilities right now. So, we don't have a facility that is bringing in revenue that can be used to offset some of the costs associated with recycling and diversion activities. So what we're looking at are a couple of options. Enterprise fund, which a lot of solid waste operations across the country are set up as, along with stormwater. So it's one of the means that communities have found to control their cost and also provide sustainable revenue. A solid waste authority, and then also there's public-private partnerships to help fund some of these programs. So to start with the enterprise fund is essentially, a way of looking at a service that a municipality or local government is providing as a business type activity. So it has, separate accounting and financial reporting requirements that basically outline, what your costs are, what your revenues are, and you basically have to, to be even at the end of the day. You cannot, under an enterprise fund, you're not going to be showing a deficit every year. It's basically got to be self-sustaining. It also allows you to be able to say what the cost of service delivery is for, different services that you're providing. So you can say what different programs are costing you because you have the financial and accounting reporting and tracking mechanisms in place to tell you that. You can also issue, that cost includes debt. So you're looking at, your debt costs, you're looking at your indirect cost of operations, you're looking at O&M, capital replacement. So everything is kind of rolled up into what the enterprise fund has to show financially. And then, your debt repayment as an enterprise fund is you're basically guaranteeing that you can repay debt based on the revenues that you have coming into the system. And like I said earlier, this is an increasing trend, throughout the country, and you see a lot of folks moving in that direction. So the benefits of enterprise fund, I pretty much hit on a lot of them. You got full cost accounting. You're able to establish user fees and charges to basically shift the costs of the services and programs to specific users instead of through just general taxation. The fees that you generate as an enterprise fund can be used to support debt. And then it's a sustainable funding source that you can count on year by year and budget for, what you need to do on a yearly basis to to have that sharp incline up that we want in terms of the aggressive strategy of getting to 75% diversion, within the next 10 years.
So just real quickly on that one, Martin, in an enterprise fund, then it would sit in a department or within the mayor's office, right?
Yes, the enterprise fund could sit within Public Works.
Got it.
It would act the same way Metro Water Services.
Got it. Thank you. All right.
Another option that we're looking at is a solid waste authority, and this is the Solid Waste Authority Act of 1991 legislatively basically allows for communities to participate. It's as simple as, well, I won't say it's simple, but basically you can establish an authority by resolution. So a local government, would have a resolution that says, yes, we want to develop a solid waste authority. You can do it within Davidson County alone as a starting point. Could eventually expand that into adjacent counties. The thing is that each member jurisdiction basically has to have a resolution that approves membership and joining that solid waste authority. The structure of a solid waste authority is to establish, basically you have a board of directors which has at least one representative from each jurisdiction that's a part of that authority. Participants can, either be added or deleted by resolution, and most authorities have similar legal powers and authorities as any other public type instrument. So they can establish revenues and cost expenses. They can issue debt. There are a variety of powers that they have. The solid waste, the goal or the idea behind the solid waste authority is that there are things that we require charter amendment that we could get housed under a solid waste authority that would not need to go through a charter amendment. So, in terms of structurally trying to get the programs and to get the authorities that we need, it appears at least, and we need to do a little bit more research on it and look into and talk to legal and get more details on it. But structurally, that allows you to have a solid waste authority to say, these are the ordinances we want passed. We're going to contract and interact with haulers as one entity. We're going to implement programs across Davidson County because that's, we're going to have that as our jurisdiction, and that will be the area in which we have control. So those are some of the things that would be beneficial.
Are these mutually exclusive? Are you saying that the enterprise fund and the solid waste authority coexist?
They do coexist, but they don't have to. They can be an enterprise fund. You can have set up under Public Works.
Fund, okay.
But an authority would have to have
An authority would have to essentially be an enterprise fund.
Authority itself, would be an enterprise.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so this one is inclusive of the other, but not.
Yes, correct.
Right, got
It
it.
really gets down to the restrictions that exist because of the charter and when Metro was created is where we really started hitting a little bit of wall looking at the enterprise fund basis and where sort of the discussion for authority sort of started to become on the table, because it's still just not that easy to enact an enterprise fund the way the USD charter is written currently.
And you made some allusion that made me think that you were a little bit ambivalent, or it was a little ambiguous to you as to whether or not the Solid Waste Authority is legally viable yet. Or do you
No,
already
it
know?
is.
It is. Okay.
It is. In terms of what I was talking about is the structure. There are a lot of different ways you can structure it and how you would actually have it set up and what authorities you would give it and what rights and how it would actually function. All of those things are things that we would need to dive into a little bit more deeply to figure out. But the idea of a solid waste authority is allowed by legislation. There aren't any, we did check with legal, Metro Legal, and there aren't any fatal flaws. There aren't any major issues or hurdles. This isn't groundbreaking things, in terms of this type of structure. So there isn't any, at least initial concern or heartburn from a legal standpoint, but ultimately what it structurally looks like at the end of the day, who's a member of it, how many members we have on the board, all those kind of things would be things we would need to work out. So some of the key powers that would be available with the Solid Waste Authority would be, control of collection of solid waste for disposal or processing. You'd be able to have that constant delivery of services across the USD and the GSD. You'd be able to develop projects within the jurisdiction boundary. So if you wanted to build a transfer station, or if you wanted to build a material recovery facility, or if you had other programs that you wanted to implement from a project standpoint, a Solid Waste Authority has the rights, has the power to be able to do so. Property acquisition. And then you can also operate, maintain, and manage projects. So, on the facility infrastructure side, if you just wanted to own it, you could then contract with a private operator to operate the facility. You have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you develop, operate, and run the facilities as a part of Solid Waste Authority. You'd be able to issue debt to finance the projects, and then the revenues that come into the authority would be used to pay back the debt. And then you're also able to enter in negotiated contracts or agreements with other local governments or even the state of Tennessee or any private entities that wanted to utilize the services of the Solid Waste Authority. Whether somebody wanted to bring materials to infrastructure facility or wanted to become a member of the authority, you can negotiate with private entities. You can negotiate with states and other local governments to provide collection services, to provide processing services. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to operate, who you want to do business with, and the conditions upon which you want to do business with them. You establish the service level you want, you establish the metrics you want, you establish the reporting you want. So you want to know what's going on in the commercial sector, you want to know what's going on in the residential sector. And then you can look at the idea of potentially in the future going to a regional solid waste authority. And that would be more of a regionally shared commitment of the provision of solid waste services, be able to maximize utilization of funds and resources, and have an increased efficiency and cost effectiveness. And just to show that this isn't, like I mentioned earlier, groundbreaking. There's already a couple of essential solid waste authorities within Tennessee, and Rutherford County is actually taking that under consideration now. So this isn't something that would be, difficult from a legal or just from, has this ever been done somewhere else? There'll be plenty of examples to look at and to, take lessons learned from other communities that have rolled out, authorities, whether it be stormwater or solid waste. But there's a lot of examples to pull from to move this one forward. So that's pretty much it in terms of a lot of the detail. Any particular questions or answers that we can provide?
Open it up to the board for questions. Jennifer, you can start there. We'll hear you.
So my question's, I think maybe for Lisa about the save as you throw, or if anyone can answer that, that'd be great. I like the idea on paper a lot. I'm wondering if when we start finding people for are we going to get more socks in recycling? Because people are trying to get the recycling bin full and the trash bin low. Has that been an issue in other cities where people sort of game the system?
More what's in the trash? Yeah.
The clothing that was mysteriously winding up with the tin cans. I don't get that. Who does that? That's crazy.
The first two questions I always get from communities are, will it lead to increases in contamination or will it lead to increases in illegal dumping? Either of those things are the big things that people are always worried about. We've compared statistically, we've compared through interviews with 1,000 communities that have and don't have pay-as-you-throw. And what we find is that there's no significant difference between the two, between the contamination levels in pay-as-you-throw and save-as-you-throw and non-save-as-you-throw communities. And as far as illegal dumping, we find that if there's an issue, it generally it's in about 20% of the communities they have an issue, and it has not lasted longer than 3 months.
Meaning people learn because they've been fined for having socks in with their tin cans?
That, and they also, they also tire of they're already paying for at least a 32-gallon can, And so they ultimately decide this is kind of a pain, we might as well just play. So.
Okay, and then the follow-up to that, and maybe Sharon roped in on this answer as well. So currently I have at home one 96-gallon bin for trash and two 96-gallon bins for recycling. Woot woot. What becomes of those bins under this kind of system? I kind of feel like I don't want those to go to waste. They're huge things, you know.
No, if that type of system, if we were to go to that type of system, then those would become part of our inventory for replacement parts. And as carts wore out, they would not be just like discarded.
In some communities, turn them into the yard waste containers. So.
And we might turn them into the yard waste containers.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I have many questions. Well, I don't even know how many questions I have. First, I need to digest the amount of information that you guys have released. Yeah, pay as you throw. I have a lot of resistance to that title. As it sounds, as soon as you put pay or taxes, increased taxes, there's going to be a resistance, I think.
That's why we're calling it save as you throw.
But at the same time, I'm on board with a few arrangements, and the first one would be we don't want anything to be complicated, because as soon as you have like which one is the small one, the big one, finding out that the simpler we do our system, people is going to engage and people is going to be participating more. And what is trash to start with? It feels that if we're going to use a bin for organics and we're going to use a bin for recycling material, what is the leftover? So I think if we approach it in that way, maybe, as you mentioned, maybe the trash is going to be the other week pickup. And I think that will have more of a clearing up for the public. It's like, okay, I have a bin that is going to be for organics and things that are messy, another one for the other things, but I know what is my trash. Since sometimes it gets very confusing what is recycled, so why not is like inform the public what is trash, and that is every other week.
That switch in mindset, I think, is a really important message, and I think it should be a very key element of the education part that's part of this getting to 75%, as well as the beyond. I neglected to mention it in my discussion, but that education and social marketing and other things that really change people from just understanding the system to really being motivated to go along with the system is our goal. That kind of a messaging, that kind of a change in, we're not really focused on trash, we're focused on diversion, we're focused on recycling, we're focused on organics. The leftover, we're trying to minimize that leftover, really think about it. That's a really important part of a message. I like the way you phrased it.
Yeah, and going to, because I'm thinking as I'm here because I'm a member of that community. That's my expertise. I'm the end user and the one that ends up with a styrofoam container somehow. Somebody brought it to my house. What do I do with this? There's no information of where. I know it's banned. There's no information where I need to dispose it, or what do I do? I store it at my garage for 6 months or something like that until I pass it to somebody else. Your next party, here's with popsicles. So something that I noticed that you guys touched was the convenience center, where they're going to take the batteries, the hazardous materials that I don't think those are well utilized yet. We don't know what to bring there. So how to make it part of this package? that the convenience center is where, like, maybe that trash that is left over, maybe that was not really trash. So that goes to the convenience center.
And one of the programs that I did talk about was the drop-offs in convenience centers. One of the lines in there was enhance the materials it accepts. So that's where you might bring the 2%ers, as I like to call them, the styrofoam, the other things that are kind of hard, don't have, are difficult to sort out of a combined stream, or don't have really strong markets unless they are really clean, or their bulkiness makes them complicated. So those kind of 2%ers could easily go to the drop-off/convenience centers. And we also think that access might be improved a little bit if there was one a little bit more westerly.
Okay. And next, I got really excited when we went into the 90%, how to get to the 90%. But I thought that maybe that was misplaced in my mind of, like, is that the last target, or that maybe at the beginning of, because it's going to take a while to establish some of those. So it almost feels like we need to start with that. Like having that structure in government, like having a job position for recycling, economic development. I think that needs to happen now. So maybe in 5 years or 10 years, we actually can do something with our plastic, with our glass, create a local economy.
And you'll see from the cost that the costs for it start right away.
That highlights it. That's the point I wanted to raise. You're right on spot. The above 75% to the 90% is activity. You want the output to happen later on, but you want the activities to start earlier. And so in my report, the startup of the activities are at about the same time as you're working on the activities that Lisa's speaking of. And it's really the timing of starting these activities is when you can basically afford it. It's an affordability issue of starting these different programs. For instance, the economic development programs are fairly expensive when you talk about the eco-industrial park, the capital outlay of building an eco-industrial park. So it becomes a question of when can you start that. But that's a 10-year project before you have an output of that facility. And so you want to be able to work on that on the front end. On an education program that I was speaking of, a highly tuned education program that is a larger format than the traditional annual education program, you want to time that for the Save As You Throw program when that rolls out. That's earlier than the above 75% timing, but the output of public motivation and some of the higher activities is 4 or 5 years later. Because when you're working on changing people's behaviors, it takes 4 or 5 years of messaging before you start to see behavior change.
So there are some costs in here that are not represented here that are infrastructure costs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there is. And they're often before the behavior change is implied to happen.
Yeah. I mean, we have a couple, are we going to do the stadium here in Nashville, like the soccer stadium? Is that approved? I'm not up, yes?
I mean, it is approved, but I think there's still discussion going on.
So those are perfect opportunities about, like how are we, as you mentioned, on, how to lead by example. I don't remember what metro construction projects, recycle content ordinance, like that in the trend system. I mean, we're growing and we're a little late, but definitely needs to be on Metro's mind of lead by example. And then I think I have like a solution for construction and demolition. We just ban construction in Nashville for the next 10 years. And then we're good.
You're going to lead the charge on that, right?
Yeah, we're just growing too fast, and we have ambitious developers, and I don't know. I don't think I even understand how to tackle that one. Now, I'm going to be in the presentation tomorrow, the task force presentation, so I'll listen to that again and see what, try to understand better how that can be solved. Thank you.
Vanessa, to answer your question in terms of what goes where, what is recyclable and what is not, you can do what I generally do, which is take a photograph of it and send it to Sharon Smith. Sharon, where does this go? I agree that the education really has to start right away, or as soon as the plan is implemented. The one thing that intrigues me is the concept of the Solid Waste Authority. Now, is there something in place, does the Sports Authority have this kind of autonomy? They do. Okay, so this is not an unprecedented thing in Nashville. Boy, I wish we had done that a long time ago.
It doesn't eliminate the Solid Waste Region Board, by the way.
We just transitioned to become the Solid Waste Authority.
It's really no different than Metro Water. It's just, once again, get to the fact that they have the ability to enact that across the board because they service the whole county the same. The fact that so much of Sharon's budget and Mark's budget comes from the tax base, which is split in half depending on where you live, just makes, she has a lot of restrictions on how she can utilize money and how the money is funneled into the program. Just trying to figure that out from an enterprise funding standpoint, as we started talking more about authority, some of the questions we had, the authority seems to eliminate some of those concerns.
Yeah, I can see that angle is a lot better. How much pushback are we going to get from council on this?
That's where it's going to come down to.
Yeah.
It's the political will to want to move.
Okay.
Because definitely you're enacting on, anyone who lives in the USD, you're ultimately enacting a new fee structure.
Yeah.
Because in their minds, right or wrong, most people probably feel like they pay zero for solid waste service because it's part of that property tax they pay.
Well, and the concept of issuing a 32-gallon receptacle for free, as was, I think, Lisa put out. I mean, that was Sharon.
That's just kind of a example of what it might include. I at least don't think that's necessarily what's going to happen.
It's a way of getting the trash collected, though, without a fee, without an additional fee. And the only other thing I wanted to say was that I like Lisa's idea of collecting organics weekly and all the rest every other week, because that's the kind of material people want out of the house. It's what smells the first, and if you could get them to transition to that way of thinking, that would be a wonderful thing. So.
Thank you very much. I just want to like to give my sentiments to the public, John and Bruce, and the community, because I feel your passion too. I want the results. I'm a results-oriented kind of guy. I want to see results. We've got negative press. We got negative comments about what hasn't been done. We want this plan to be the best plan out there. And Martin, you had me when you were giving your presentation. I felt that the plan was going to be just executed flawlessly, but then it kind of left it to me where it felt like I was hopeless, because the regulatory issues are what we got to solve in order to get this passed. And how soon do we get those regulatory issues solved so we can execute your plan? You got great plans, but if we can't get the regulatory support, it's all for nothing. Because that's probably what's been happening long ago. We can't get the funding. We can't get the regulatory support. How much is Metro Council involved in this plan for us? If we can't get these issues solved, this plan will go nowhere. So I want to understand, how can we all as a team get these issues where we can get our lawmakers involved? How soon can we get them involved so we can start implementing the plan and get the funding that we need?
Well, I'd say we've already started down that process. As part of our public engagement, we've been interviewing several of Metro Council folks on the Public Works Committee and getting their feedback and talking with people in the mayor's office to getting their feedback. They're supportive initially of the idea of a solid waste authority. Some of the council members, Zach's actually been in the meetings, interviewing them. They have been supportive of a lot of the programs that we're talking about. They have actually been willing, I guess, Zach, give about an hour of their time, which is valuable time to a council member, and they are spending an hour to sit down and talk with us about, what their thoughts are, what they're looking for, their level of engagement and interest, and it seems to be there. So I think there is interest in really trying to sit down and figure out how do we solve the jurisdictional political boundary issue that we have.
Have you guys, or have we received any feedback from them on their actions on what they can do to help support this? I know we don't have any dollars amounts yet. So
right.
We don't have those yet. But have you heard anything from them as far as they want to? Well,
and obviously, we're pretty careful about speaking about specific dollars.
Absolutely.
A lot of the same comments y'all have are very common from what we've heard. Convenience, if it's a plan that's convenient to my constituents, I think it's something that can be enacted. When you start talking about safety, grow, exactly the two things that you mentioned and that Lisa brought up, is there going to be more illicit dumping? It's amazing, two or three of the council members very much commented on illegal dumping as it exists now. Particularly Councilman Pridemore says he literally picks up garbage as a trash every day almost in his own personal truck. So that is a concern in some of the councilmen. I think the biggest piece that we have is the point that I always make to them, and Maria goes with me to most of these, and as Chris pointed out, we show them that graphic and the fact that Middle Point is closing. When you start discussing the point that no matter, this is not a 5-year from now decision or a 10-year from now decision, you've got to start making a decision now. Now, when that landfill closes, you're not stuck in a situation where waste management is your only option as a city, and at that point, you have no choice but Sharon or Mark or whoever's in those positions at that time coming to you and saying, hey, our cost just went up 50%. It doesn't matter. I have no choice. That's what my fees are going up to go to landfill. That's what really resonates. That's when we met with the Public Works Committee chairman. That's the first thing he said. This should be how you lead in the conversation with every council member you talk to, because it's pretty easy to kick the can down the street when that's not a lingering effect. The fact that there is a concern is not just, I think, I don't want to speak for Sharon, but some of the other reasons some of this authorities come up is some of the involvement Sharon has on a regional basis. It's not just a concern for Davidson County, it's a concern for everybody in the 13, 14 county radius around Davidson County. So you're seeing a lot of movement regionally because of that. And I think it's starting to infiltrate its way up the ladder to that council and mayor level. Sharon may want to add something about our specific meetings with the mayor's office and your meeting with the mayor today.
I think that and Zach brought up a lot of really good points, that we are trying to slowly educate them and talk to them. Heidi Campbell is on the Regional Mayor's Caucus. And for years, the regional mayors have met to talk about transit. But now they're meeting to talk about transit and trash, because the closing of this landfill that 19 counties use is becoming something that they're very concerned about. The growing amount of waste being thrown out is something they're very worried about. And that speaks volumes to the interest of our elected officials in how waste is managed going forward. I appreciate so much what Vanessa said. We've got to focus on how we can get things into the recycling and into the organics. stop reliance on landfills, because they're going to become more and more expensive. We're trying to be proactive by starting this planning process now, but even then, it's just like transit. It's already late. We all wish we were further along and that we had covered more ground. But I think this administration is very interested in waste reduction, and I heard that directly today. And I think a lot of our council members are very interested in it and believe that we can't do the ostrich, stick your head in the sand thing forever. We've got to face it.
Very good, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And I think that so much of, I grew up in Nashville, and so much of what gets done in Nashville is reactive because we have, it's what's going on with our traffic right now. Everything's emergent, and we have to deal with things in such an emergent manner that we don't plan well. And we're probably a little late to be even considering this with the landfills closing and everything. But I do think that this particular issue, and traffic does too, and they're intertwined, of course, from an environmental standpoint especially, requires a paradigm shift. And I think that what I don't hear a lot, and a lot of these discussions, and I brought this up last time, is a discussion about marketing. You addressed it a little bit, but I guess when I try to visualize how that actually plays out, is it a multimedia marketing campaign that's equivalent to a food pyramid of what you do with your trash, that's sort of this iconic, this is how you deal with it? Or are you really just pushing it in through the schools and the education system because you realize you've got a burgeoning population that's going to be taking on the mantle? Or are you just pummeling it on television? I mean, and do you have Smokey the Bear up there, or what is it,
A lot of different approaches there, and I've learned in the last 10 years about social media, which is a foreign territory for me, from my generation,
OMG.
But it begins with a rebranding, and I didn't mention it in the PowerPoint. But I would begin, my recommendation, and every city has its own approach in how it brands its city departments. But what I did in Austin, what I did in Fresno when I was there, I renamed the department. Your mission is often portrayed to the public through the naming of the department. So if your department is solid waste department, as it often is, many years ago, the name of the department was sanitation department, because you were out there collecting trash off the streets for health and sanitation reasons to prevent the rat population from growing. That was the 1930s, the 1940s. And then we got into solid waste management and integrated solid waste systems. And solid waste was in our titles. Moving past solid waste into sustainable materials management, or zero waste, or any resource recovery, or any type of the newer terminology, teaches the public that we're here to recover resources. We're not managing waste, we're recovering resources. So many, many departments across the country are renaming.
Can you call your solid waste authority a zero waste authority? Can you call it whatever you want?
You certainly can. You certainly can.
Hillbilly GMs if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a small thing, but I mean, I think that calling it the zero waste authority.
I think the name means a lot. And in Austin, we played around with it. We had a public naming contest for 3 months. And we did not select the top name that the public came up with, because they got into music band names. and we ended up selecting an employee top choice, and Austin Resource Recovery. and we're in the business of recovering resources. That was the concept there. But I forget it was some type of a rock band that came to the top in music. You guys can relate to music, and we invited the rock music band to be part of the unveiling of the new name, but they were doing a tour of England and weren't in the States. But nonetheless,
As enticing as it was.
yes,
Yes.
they sent us a postcard. That's all. But I do believe that the name of the organization, a logo of the organization, means something in the public education realm, and then you build the theme around that. I also believe in rebranding on the trucks. There's opportunities to deliver messages on the trucks. You may already do that, but it's an opportunity. It's a moving billboard.
But what Jennifer pointed out is so true to me. I don't know still exactly what's recyclable. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's really important that so when so that's huge and that's great. But going back also to the nuts and bolts of it, the messaging and the educational component of it seems huge.
And part of your messaging to the public is color coding. Blue for recycling, green for organics,
Right.
a brown or a gray for trash. People like color coding. They can relate to that. They know which color container. And then I carry that forward and color code the equipment and the trucks to that color. The recycling crews wore the blue uniforms to the blue trucks, to the blue containers. And the public really picked up on that theme. The literature really carried through with the color theme and the logo theme. And so you're building your public education around colors and logos. And that's taken straight out of the book of marketing products and
Signals and cues.
and advertising. You're picking up on what P&G and Kroger's and Johnson & Johnson utilize in their marketing techniques.
Just don't use orange or they'll start eating the trash.
Yeah.
Right?
and again, back into the social media, we a lot of social media advertising is free. And that's where a lot of the eyeballs are, rather than the billboards and the TV ads.
Not for long, though.
And that's a
We just
new,
need to get some Russians.
that's a new learning curve for me.
So
And separate,
I want to make sure that it's about 7:25. We have some other board members to comment. So if there's a burning comment that helps respond to what our.
I just wanted to make the point that the early phase of education, the very first phase, is meant to include social marketing, not social media, but social marketing work, because all the work that we've done in that field and others have done in the field show that if you target it so it's motivational, you look at personal contacts and not electronic contacts, but personal contacts. Pollsters aren't stupid. They go door to door for a reason. That not only has a much bigger effect, we've compared the effect, but we've also found that the retention is also much higher.
Yeah.
So that's
a very good point.
That communication is really important, and the retention means that money that you spent lasts for tons over time, so the payback is even better. So.
Thank you. Councilman, you have any questions, comments? You want to bring some political reality to us?
If you want to speak political reality, I was previously on the council back in '95, and we've gone over everything we've talked about here tonight. It's been talked about before, but there was no political will by the council or the previous mayors to do anything about it, and so the can got kicked down the road. Hopefully, we've got some new people on board in the council and a different attitude from the mayor's office. But the big thing you touched on was the fact that that landfill is going to expire in 7 years. That's a big, big motivator. So hopefully we can take advantage of it.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what I think, because it's not been mentioned right, but I think it sounds very similar to what we do in Goodlettsville. I would assume that if you had the solid waste authority, then there would be like a fee each resident would pay. So in that portion, then that funds it all. I assume Metro would give the authority some of their assets.
Yeah.
So as a point to the commission, that's tax dollars that the commission's getting to save to prevent, if they got to do a tax increase for the transit or whatever, that's so many, I don't know how many cents that is on the dollar or something like that, but that's also another point that hasn't even been mentioned in any of this, so.
That's a good point, Jeff. I'm always very careful when we talk about separating something out of tax law, to be clear that in no way am I indicating that the mayor's office or the council is probably going to have a property tax reduction, but at least it's exactly what you said. It opens the allocation for potentially other things that may defer a potential future tax increase.
And then with that, I just wonder, has there been any number crunching as far as like what the monthly fee would be for residents?
Oh, God, that's way too early.
Okay,
You're frightening me.
that's what I assumed. I know what ours is. That's the reason I was.
So I just, first of all, thank you all. That was a robust chunk of information, and we need the PowerPoint, at least. And knowing that this is not the plan, these are your ideas. We're going to actually, we'll see a plan that's actually that we can go through and with a lot more detail. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands we're not voting tonight. We're looking at a bunch of really great ideas with much more information behind it. Just one question I had is, and this is kind of detaily, but there was a discussion about the surcharge, and that could like do like 10%, make a 10% hit on where we are, and. Right now, our surcharge, if I'm correct, is $6 a ton for MSW, and what, $3 a ton or $1 or something for C&D. It's
$1 a yard.
$1 a yard. Okay, it's not even. Okay, whatever. So, and then I heard, I think Lisa, you said if you 1.5 times that, that's kind of what's usual. And I didn't know if I understood that, but I'm wondering.
1.5 times the landfill charge.
The landfill charge, right. So if we're saying that means we're going to go to $9, that just by raising it $3, that we think we can get a 10% hit? Is that kind of what we're saying here? Okay, so tell me what you're saying, or what we're saying.
How much is the tipping fee at the landfill? I'm not asking how much the surcharge is.
Oh, I see.
It's in the 20s.
That's the thing.
It's in the
1.5 times to 2 times the landfill charge, not the surcharge.
Got it.
36.94.
So you would be doubling to tripling the landfill.
Got it. Okay, so it's going up 30, what did you say it was?
36.94.
All right, $37 right now, right? So it's going to go up to $55, more or less. All right.
To give you an example, I mean, the EU, when they issued their landfill directive, they also put a very hefty surcharge on landfilling.
Mm-hmm.
It's 70 euro
Right.
per ton. So there's a lot of economic incentive to do something else.
Yeah, and I know that, John has been talking about this for a while, and I'm just wondering kind of when we were talking about the ballpark, what it was. So that's helpful. That was a detail thing. I know we're going to have a lot more. I want to save time for anybody in the public to comment. It's 7:29 right now, so we have about 30 minutes. I don't believe there's any other business. Let me just make sure. Does anybody have any other business they want to raise? We need to save some time at the end.
I just wanted to see if, Sharon, if you already had a date in mind for our next meeting.
We do not. One thing that we would like to do is not get our meetings caught up in the whole transit thing. So we are going to try and do some more public engagement and some more council engagement, and probably reconvene maybe this summer. But we really need to get some more council and public engagement without trying to hold meetings that compete with transit. We started our plan before this whole transit thing happened, but transit is kind of overshadowing us a little bit, so.
And the mayor's election as well, which we're on.
Yeah.
No, at the time as well.
So, all right, so I'm going to hold that because maybe a little more conversation on that, but I'm going to leave for like 5 minutes at the end of the meeting. So can I get a show of hands of who wants to speak? Yeah, okay. Well, great. So So why don't we, so it's, if we want to leave 10 minutes left, why don't you take 10 minutes each and we'll check in and see if you go, hold, I need a lot more than that. But, so Bruce, you don't need that much? Okay. So I'll give you a heads up when it's 5 minutes just to let you know.
Well, thank you. My name is Bruce Wood. I'm the elected president of Burnt, a longtime nonprofit environmental group specializing in solid waste and recycling. Nashville, to do this plan that's unfolding, would need a brain transplant. I mean, this is so divorced from the reality of where we are. It's just amazing. It doesn't start where we are. It doesn't start with a 10-year plan that has been out of kilter every year since then and is way out of kilter now. It doesn't start with the premier solid waste program, Kirby, diverting 1% of the waste stream. They have all these pictures of decision-making processes and stuff like that, and it's just not applicable. I mean, I'll give you a specific example. One year they did something to the C&D law, and they wanted to have make sure that every construction and demolition, every construction plan had a disposal plan. And so they enlisted, I think it was codes, it could have been zoning, when they looked at the plans just to check to see if they had a plan on who's going to take care of that waste. Oh man, there was a lot of complaining by codes or zoning. That's a terrible imposition. We cannot do that. It's just too time consuming. And then finally they ended it. When my understanding, which could be wrong, is that it was a basic check. Is there a plan to give it to one of the C&D disposal companies? And no, there wasn't. It didn't get done. Metro subsidizes solid waste and recycling and composting by $20 million a year. That's in that regional plan, and that didn't change from last year. That's the same figure. And so how much more is Metro going to put into this? 20 million, 30 million, 40 million? How much is Metro willing to pay? Especially, we're not getting the results. I mean, back there, he was talking about if prices raise, if costs raise at middle point, you don't have any alternatives. Well, yes, you do have an alternative. Recycle and compost more. And we're not doing that. We're not even trying. And then I'll say something, I will say it, is I don't think that this board is prepared for this. I think you need about 2 years of practice and reading and research to be ready for this kind of material. I think it's just, I'm certainly not commenting on anybody's intelligence. I don't understand a lot of it. But I'm just saying, I don't think this board is prepared to make these decisions or to assimilate this type of information. I just don't. I think you need the 2 years. And I've talked to people who know the regional boards, and they say that there's good boards and there's bad boards. There's 66 of them across the state, and that the thing that makes the difference is the chairman. If it's a good chairman, then it's a good board. And I don't think we have a good chairman. I think the chairman has been chair for 17 years, and this board can't perform, and I think it's time for John Sherman to step back, maybe after the plan is complete, because nothing's going to get done on this plan. I would do that, but I just think it's time for John Sherman to step back, resign, and not be the chair anymore after 17 years. There's people going to college who are 17 years old.
Bruce, do you have anything to say about what was presented?
I think that's a pretty important thing. I'm the only one who's
Has nothing to do
saying
with
it.
what was just presented.
What's that?
Has nothing to do with what was just presented.
I just said that this board was not prepared for this plan, and that it takes 2 years to work and have subcommittee and committee meetings and meeting once a month to understand, and that this board was not prepared, and that somebody at the state told me there's good boards and there's bad boards, and the bad boards are usually reflected by the chair. And I'm saying John Sherman is a bad chairman. He hasn't done a good job here, and he should resign after this plan is complete. I think that would be a good idea, and it would help the solid waste in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. You're always enlightening. John, would you like to step up? John, we got about 24 minutes. We need about 5 minutes to wrap up, so you got 19 minutes. And knowing that we're going to have more time tomorrow and we're going to have another shot at this, because I would like another meeting this summer, just to see where we are as well.
Yeah, I thought they had scheduled on the end of June, I think, was there's the final presentation or something like that. Or, yeah, and that would be after the referendum. But anyhow, I shouldn't be even talking about that because that's chewing into my time here. Where to begin? I've worked really hard to build the interest in material recovery down at the council and with the mayor's office, and I have too much invested in it to just, be silent, to those people. And, Don was on it for 8 years, 2 terms. Knows some of the realities up there, like Vanessa was pointing out, convenience and stuff. I mean, we got large parts of this county. My friend Carl Meyer lives over near TSU. He says the way the trash is done there, people don't even throw it in carts. They throw it over the fence into the alley, and then the sheriff's department has regular sweeps through to pick it up. Okay, so then you have Lisa Skumats here with the pay-as-you-throw thing, as if every part of Nashville is like Green Hills or something. It's not. According to the plan you just blessed, we got a 74% participation rate. That can't mean that that's fully getting all their recyclables, or the figures would be different on this sheet that you have here. This reflects reality in terms of what Nashville will do unless you really figure out a way to incentivize them to do something different. It's pretty pathetic.
How do you incentivize them to do something different?
Well, from the way we present it to get the interest in council is we really heavily emphasize the economics and the development, basically give the advantages of going to zero waste in terms of what happens to the economy with all the things that happens. I think we can do that. But I think the zero waste thing, which I did a bar on this almost 25 years ago, I mean, that goes over really well. People like the idea of really good performance. They don't want to give up convenience. They don't want all the separate billing stuff and complication and stuff like that. But if we can make it easy and make it happen, they like that. Now, what I saw with this plan here is just complication upon complication upon. Did you see those circles with all those divisions of all these little different programs that we were supposed to add together and cobble together to get upward to eventually 75% or something like that? This is the talk we got, 30 years ago. I remember a conference I went to. John was the executive director of TDEC at the time. They got a conference together. They had some lady come in from Knoxville and said, "Oh, we did this survey. 90% of the citizens say they would recycle." And everybody was, yay, yay. Well, that was mainly the crowd there is the crowd that isn't around anymore. You see who's out here now, Bruce and me, from the public, and Andy over here, or Ram, too. 660,000 people, and this is all you have left. And basically, when I talk to people out there, and I'm always trying to recruit people, I mean, the level of cynicism that I have, that I see toward government is such that when you start to come across like this team has come across, I mean, you get some of the wonky people at council and stuff, and oh, yeah, that sounds really good, but you know, out in the public, how's that going to play? And ultimately, they gotta answer to the public. And we have people in parts of the town that want to become a part of USD with a major attractor being they don't have to do all this separate billing for their trash. You know, they get to have it just, you know, conveniently handled. And that's a real attractor. So now this group is going to talk about, oh, we're going to be all these separate billing and all this stuff, complications. So the public's going to go, oh, so for doing all this complication, you're going to charge me money for that? It's like, well, why don't we just skip this whole thing is what the reaction's going to be a lot and in terms of the part of the voters. The council districts vary. I mean, you'll get some of the people that'll like one thing and another, but you're going to get a divide here. We have that on the transit thing. The whole set of people that got up there said, yeah, for transit, you know, this plan, this boondoggle plan that we got here, none of those people use transit. You know, the people who actually use the bus system weren't in favor of it. It's a divisive issue right now, and we've had a few of those, and I don't want to see this become a divisive issue. It doesn't need to be, you know, but it will be if we start, you know, having this be a plan that benefits consultants and wonky government types that, you know, sit in bureaucratic positions and are fine with complications, but to the public, you know, that's not leaving a good taste in their mouth for recycling. So the way we've worked back on it, and some of you know this from our presentation, we look at how do you get to zero waste, and we come to some very fast conclusions. I mean, one of the things you have to do is you have to have a wet-dry approach, for example. That terminology didn't even come up today's presentation. You have to have that if you're going to get to 100% diversion. To get to 100% diversion, everything in the waste stream has to get sent to a destination that's not a disposal facility. You have to process everything in the waste stream in order to physically bring that about. And your biggest diversion, you know, market is composting, so that's why the wet-dry approach is so needed, because if you can't market your compost, you can't divert it. So you have to have that source separation for that, and that helps the processing facility. But if you look online with bulk handling systems and CP Group and stuff like this and watch all the technology out there for the processing systems and stuff, it's really neat stuff that's being developed. And that's the type of stuff that is really exciting to have people. You take the school kids through and see all of waste getting turned into, you know, commodities, you know, to go to the businesses, and you have Enerchem over here, like up in Alberta, doing pyrolysis, for example. A lot of piping, a lot of fancy stuff, but you come out of there with methanol and ethanol on the back end and stuff like that, and it's, you know, that's where you want that vision to present on the front end, you know, get people interested in it. I heard naming, you know, that's gimmickry. Okay, that's fine, you know, have some of that, but what I didn't hear in this presentation is the vision that gets us to zero waste. We can do it so much easier if we use some techniques. I mean, the prison system got up to 80% pretty quickly, you know, right away, you know, with the wet-dry approach back in the mid-90s. They don't have the market options for some of the materials. Our pilots got up pretty high, you know, and that, again, we didn't have market options for some of the stuff, the heavy molded products, the aggregates and the pyrolysis and you know, some of the other conversion that's needed. But we can do that. And
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, because I went to your training and I'm getting a little lost. Okay, so I understand that you're asking for wet-dry, which is 2 bins, right? But
yeah, minimum. There are some styles of it that can get a little bit more complicated than that. But the object is to keep it as simple as possible.
Right. Okay, and so if the wet, which the consultants talked about earlier, is the composting, right, the organic waste, and then the dry is the trash and the recyclables that we already do, is that different than what you're proposing?
That was what I was proposing, but that's not
That's not what you heard them say?
No, I didn't hear them say that.
That's what I heard them say.
I heard endless save as you throw, which is Orwellian. It's pay as you throw, and because that scam has been getting uncovered, and now they got to name it a different name. It's pay as you throw. It's the more you throw, the more you pay. It's not the more you throw, the less you pay.
So just for my clarity, the bins that they're proposing are the same as the bins that you're proposing. Is it the logistics?
Well, then they have trash, though. This is what the pay-as-you-throw gets applied to. And in a zero-waste system, you don't have trash. You could process it all as a trash fraction, but why separate that from the rest of the dry? Because it just adds an extra expense and complication. So it's easier to just separate the whole dry from it. The recyclables come out from dry very easily. That's not a problem. It's the composites that you're then sending to other recovery venues, residues from which you send to other reprocessing. And Bob got into a little of that when he described the situation. I think it was Edmonton, or maybe it was Austin, the business park there. So that would be happening.
Okay, so when he was talking about Austin, and I asked about Charlottesville, where they're doing the dirty MRFs, it sounds a lot like what you're talking about with the dry goods.
The dirty MRF is everything mixed together. It seems like in the industry there's been a schism in the past a lot. On the one hand, you have the environmental people that are all very enthusiastic and they want to separate everything out, and then you have on the other side, no, just trash, and we'll process it somehow. And the wet dry is in between. It's the middle ground. We view the more moderate approach to it, where you're trying to take the best for both and not just go to one extreme or the other extreme. You go to all the empty, things that people do to save recyclables, and that gets you this. And you go to the dirty MRF, the total dirty MRF, where everything's mixed together, and then you get an inferior product in terms of, you get what Steve Vinnie does up in Cleveland. He gets about a 30% recovery from mixed waste with competing with cheap landfills up there, but that's not 100%.
So the difference between what you're saying and what they're saying is that in their dirty MRF, in the dirty MRFs that have occurred in Austin and Charlottesville and in other places, they're not taking out the compost.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that, because compost tends to get contaminated when it's mixed in with that, because you always get that odd thing that's thrown in there, that thermometer or whatever, that just sends the mercury numbers through the roof, and then nobody wants to buy the compost when they find that out.
Right. And so if the compost was taken out and it's just recycling and trash together, is that what you're proposing?
I think that's a minimum, and you can always do more than that, but I think that's the simple minimum that you want to start with, and you want to assume that you're trying to make it as simple as possible, and then start asking, well, is the community ready for more than that? But you don't want to start out with saying, well, this community is only made up of the type of people that are in this room or on this board, and then get surprised when the bulk of the community doesn't react as you do to that. That's when you end up with this, and that's not what I want. That's what I'm fighting. And every citizen's been coming from this board. Landfilling's the last thing they want done. They on and on. They don't want landfilling. We're doing this now, and my prediction is if Bruce and I were to go away and just you go forward with this set of consultants, you're going to end up with this, because
it's just going to get bogged down. Is this the Staten Island ferry sheet?
Pardon?
Are you holding up the Staten Island ferry sheet?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I didn't give a separate one out because most of you guys have this 2016 numbers already. So I didn't have that with me here, but I just thought I'd waive it because you all are.
Hey, John, I've got a question. I know in one of our other meetings, one of the big things that you really presented that was really important as far as getting the public to do it is basically we had to charge them more for the stuff. And especially, I remember you really talked about business, and I heard that in this presentation today too.
Yeah, we have a little complication on that. Tiffany, according to to CDM, was going to be doing the economic analysis and that, and I got together with Tiffany to do our presentation on those numbers, and she said, "Oh no, Lisa's going to be doing those," and so I
I just met Lisa. I didn't even meet. I've heard Lisa now tonight. I've not met her. I've not heard from her. So what the state law allows us to do is basically raise the fees to cover costs to Davidson County. So at the current way the law stands, we got to calculate that. And that's not the full amount, but our preliminary, we tried to do this privately using some consultants to come up with these numbers, and they didn't complete the studies. The TEC study came in, their approximate numbers were somewhere around $195 a ton for MSW, and I think one of them, the Emma Urban Cruise Ship, was at like 40 for C&D. But we didn't complete that study. That needs to be done. I didn't hear anything about that tonight. But that we got to conform to state law. It took a lot to get that in the state. That's the best we could do, and so we got to conform to that. But those numbers, basically, when we looked at that, it is not enough to drive it to 100% just alone. It would be if we could charge the full amount of cost to everybody. But state law, we got the best of what we could get at the state. Right now, Metro is kind of stretching it in terms of with their $6 thing, which they hadn't justified. So we got the best we could get. That's our situation. So what those numbers, if those are numbers, the accurate numbers, they will work to help, and from a flow control standpoint, but basically Metro has got to figure out a way to grab the entire waste stream and run it through processing facilities. It can do it a la San Jose with their franchise arrangement, where they basically worked a deal, and that's a city of 800,000 some people, and it's bigger than Nashville, and they have one contractor, Republic Service, and it took them a bunch of years to work out the contract, but then they put the contract online for us to have a much easier time starting with. Yeah, it's gone over pretty well. Everything's collected by one company, and they are processed. They have benchmarks they got to meet.
That doesn't really have anything to do with my question. My question was more that in one of your earlier presentations, to help get them to zero waste, we penalize them for charging the stuff that's not recyclable. You were talked one time about increasing those costs,
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I heard out of this presentation tonight.
There was some of that in there. That was not the weakest part of their presentation. The weakest part was physically how they're structured the program to get to the zero waste. That was where I think they're going to really fall down. Their focus is how do we get money, and the public's going to go, okay, what are we going to get for this money? And if we look out there and we see something that's not very particularly impressive, and we say that, I mean, people in council, is council going to go for that and say that's enough? I'd rather start out with a zero waste plan that really, in a simple, doable way, gets us to fully to zero waste and justifies it economically. And this, where they're at here some of that may fly through council, but it'll be kind of a struggle. I think we can do it a whole lot easier if what we're aiming for is go to full zero waste, economically explain the benefits to the economy of doing that, explain how we're going to alter the fees that we can charge to make sure all of the waste goes to the facilities and doesn't skirt it, in order to make sure it all gets processed. You start to describe those details, and then people are going to go, oh, yeah, I can picture how this is going to actually work. I think here, what we've seen so far is just, we're going to have this myriad of various little programs that are going to make life more complicated for every resident with the billing and, the separate cart sizes. And so, by the way, Metro Council did already approve 3 different cart sizes back in 2002, and then Metro Public Works never rolled them out. Still hasn't to this day, but that
Hey,
was part
John,
of the program.
I hate to be the rude one here, but I was just informed that at 5 minutes, we're getting kicked out of here. So this is what I want to suggest, is that I want to continue this conversation. Hopefully, you've heard, the team has heard some stuff. I think there's a bunch of communication stuff, and there was a lot of detail. I think some of the stuff you're saying is right on, John. So I don't want to have this as the last time you get to comment on this. I want to make sure there's more comment. Obviously, there's going to be some tomorrow, but what I'm recommending is that we kind of have reconvene and I assume you're going to have some more details. And I'm not sure when that will be. I know that we want to, it sounds like there's a need to avoid kind of the mayoral election in August in terms of having everything rolled out, but I think we could have a meeting sometime before then, just for our own enlightenment and John's enlightenment, and have you also come back. We may know more about authorities. We may know about the operation. So how do you actually communicate this way that isn't complicated? That'd be my suggestion.
Are you willing to help me out by directing the consultants to communicate with me more than they have? I've had Tiffany come to one education session, deem that was the extent of what was required in the contract for communication with the consultants. I haven't heard from anybody other than that, so there's been very little communication. I wish I could communicate with them more and work it all out before we have to come in front of the board here.
Well, I think I cannot compel anybody, or this board cannot compel the contractors to do anything. However, I think it can be a strong suggestion on our part that there's a conversation, because as you know, Jennifer was asking some questions for clarification. Jeff was asking for clarification about really important parts. And so those pieces, that we understand that better. And I think having that conversation with you all would be helpful.
If you had allowed us to have public comment on those earlier last 3 meetings, it would have relieved the pressure here, and we could have covered some of that stuff in each of those 3 missions.
So
comment.
there we have it, right? And we are where we are now, and we're trying to deal with it at this point when we've had enough information so we can actually have this conversation.
And y'all had so much information, I was watching y'all were nodding off, and then I'm forced at the end to cut my presentation short because it's all been crammed into one little thing here, and that could have been easily handled by having public comment period on all 3 previous meetings.
I'm offering an opportunity for you to come and have further comment and have further interaction. And that's what I'm suggesting, and I'm suggesting to the board that we have that. And I'm not hearing, and if the board is comfortable with that, you have the opportunity. You take it or leave it, but that's what we have right now. And sure, we could have had more, perhaps before, but here we are.
It would save time, I think.
Motion to adjourn.
Councilman.
They don't want to hear
John,
the public.
Thank you. And all in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Any opposed?
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.